Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. In a moment, we're going to resume Mr. Johnson's evidence, but before we do that, I think Mr. Millett has something he wants to say.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I should just say that after some overnight discussion with the LFB and the chairman, the team has been able to put the evidence of Pete Wolfenden back a few days to Tuesday, the 11th of September, and rejig the timetable so that we're now going to ask Mr. O'Neill, Dave O'Neill, to come on the 26th of September. We hope that doesn't disturb people's planning. We're extremely grateful to the LFB for their assistance in enabling us to rejig the timetable in that way. The simple reason we've had to do that is because the timetable for this week has become rather clogged up, and we don't want to rush the evidence or drop any particular lines of questions that seem to us to be relevant. So I just thought I ought to make that clear so that everybody knows where we are.
Thank you very much. So we can ask Mr. Johnson to come in.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Johnson.
Good morning.
Yes, do sit down and make yourself comfortable.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr.
Mr. Johnson, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for coming back to us, and I hope it hasn't caused too much inconvenience.
It's fine.
Now, yesterday, I've got a couple of short follow-up questions on the evidence you gave yesterday about training, and they are short, but they're really by way of clarification. In your evidence, and for the transcript, it's at page 204, line 17, you mentioned Neil Withers as the person that you made your recommendations to in relation to changes to policy FSG 790. Who did, what was Neil Withers' position at the time?
Excuse me. I'm not familiar with what his position was. He wasn't in isolation to him. He was a group manager who was senior to me at the time. So it would have been the people ultimately who were the policy holders for that specific policy. So it would be the specific group that oversees that policy, incident command.
And I think you told us yesterday you didn't know who they were.
Well, it's the department that I'm currently in, so it's operational response.
But can you give us some names?
Now or back then? Back then I don't know, but
then.
now it's Julian Spooner and Peter Critchell.
Yeah, but back then?
I'm not aware of that.
And do you know what Neil Withers does now?
He's left London Fire Brigade, and I believe he's working for the Lifeboat Association.
Right. At the time, do you know which committees or policy group Terry Harrington and Neil Withers were members of?
I don't know.
Now, thank you. Now, you mentioned also, and this was at pages 230 to 231 of the transcript, that Babcock were responsible and solely responsible for delivery of training. My question is, to your knowledge, was Babcock also solely responsible for deciding what went into a training package?
It's slightly more complicated than that. The brigade kind of put a bid in for what is required. It's a long process. There is a cost to it, which is a cost to the brigade, which Babcocks may agree to or may not agree to. And as such, the training course is then designed. There's consultation over what is inserted. Is it going to be adequate? Is it not going to be adequate? There's a backs and forths, but it's a long process that can take, I would suggest, a minimum of 1 year to complete.
Right. My question is, when designing the training, was Babcock guided by the LFB as to the needs and requirements of the service?
Yes.
It was.
But ultimately, they would then go away, design the package, and then ultimately there would be a conversation about whether it was adequate or not, and then changes could be made.
Thank you. Very well. Now, can I now turn to a different topic, which is command unit facilities? On pages 3 and 4 of your statement, you've described the command unit and the physical facilities or electronic facilities that it's supposed to have, and I just want to ask you to elaborate on a few of them. First of all, if you could look at page 3 of your statement, 2/3 of the way down, you referred to the Toughbook laptop. This is the second entry down in your list. And you say there is a Toughbook laptop that is designed to be used during operational incident and taken out and feed back live information to the command unit. That has never worked. How is it supposed to work using the laptop?
So it works in conjunction with the element below, which is the mesh node, which is kind of a secure Wi-Fi network. You can pass information, and it has to be over a secure Wi-Fi network and a dedicated localized network that enables information to be passed from a remote computer back to the main computer, which would be on the CU.
I see. And who is meant to feed live information back from the incident? Who operates it?
It could be anyone. So if you're looking at something at a simple incident, it would be not the team leader, it would be the map person that's responsible for mapping the incident, so they can map it, and then everything that they find, everything that they come across could be fed directly and instantly onto CSS whilst walking around with a remote laptop.
Would it enable, with the Toughbook combined with mesh node, enable an incident commander to communicate directly with, for example, the control room?
That's a difficult question because it depends what program that Control are using. So Control have different programs that they use to pass information on.
They use Vision?
Yes, they do. So Vision isn't available to pass specific information or notes across,
Right.
if you follow me. So the initial idea of the introduction of the Toughbooks was that they'd be able to use CSS, and CSS would be able to be constantly updated whilst out. So you can update CSS, but Control wouldn't be able to update CSS because it would mean going to a different screen and a different operative. It would have complicated matters significantly.
I follow. Was Toughbook used on the night of the Grenfell fire at the incident?
I've never used a Toughbook on an operational incident in my career. They've never been operationally ready to be working.
I see. So they weren't.
Never.
They weren't available at all on the CU?
They were on there, but it wouldn't work.
In an operable state?
Yes.
Right, I see. And mesh node, was that also available on the night of the fire?
No, it's never worked.
If mesh node and Toughbook had been available on the night of the fire, and I know this is a hypothetical question to some extent, but what use could have been made of them?
I fail to see how any technology could have worked better than the way that the brigade works on that night.
Okay. CSS, which is another item in your shopping list, the fourth one down, Command Support System, you say that it's designed to record every tactical or strategic decision that the officer in charge makes. These decisions are held on a central server at Union Street called the Gold Server. It doesn't work in any large incidents, and if it does not record, then the decisions are not recorded, and it is worthless. Just to clarify, do you say that actually the CSS is never useful at any large incident?
At a large incident, so for a large, my definition of large incident would be anything over 6 appliances, and I'd say no, it's useless. Right.
Well, just to be a little bit more particular, when you say it does not work at any large incidents, do you mean that it doesn't functionally operate at a large incident, or there's just no point in using it because of the nature of a large incident?
No, it's the first point. It doesn't functionally work due to IT issues, continuing IT issues where it's been unable to deal with information. At a large incident, you have a lot more information coming in, as you can appreciate, than a smaller incident. Therefore, the IT systems on the CUs just struggle significantly, and you could be spending 20 minutes doing something and then it would crash and you'd have to restart the computers, and that would be a continuing theme that is, in my knowledge, still current to this day.
And is that something in your own personal experience?
Just my experience and everyone that's ever worked on a command unit, yeah.
Right. Have you been at a large incident, as you define it, over 6 pumps, and had these kinds of problems with the CSS yourself?
I went to the previous largest incident in London, which was opposite the closing ceremony of the London Olympics, and CSS never worked there. It didn't work on the night of Grenfell either.
Did you try to use it?
I turned it on and off 3 times, the computer, to try and get it to work. And then the distraction of trying to turn it on and off was just so great that it was decided just to not bother anymore and just plough ahead without it. But I was confident it wouldn't have worked anyway, because my experience is that it just doesn't work past 6 appliances.
Do you have a recollection of the CSS on CU8? Let's start with that one. Crashing at any stage?
I was on CU7, which is Wembley's command units.
Yes.
No, I don't have a memory of it crashing because it never started.
Right. Okay. We may have to come back to that. Just in terms of what it might be able to do, does it pick up vision entries?
It does, yes.
Yes, it does. And you say in this part of your statement that it's designed to record every tactical or strategic decision that the officer in charge makes. Is there anything else it records, as well as the vision entries?
Yeah, so as an idea, it's fantastic. And you can record video points, you can record points that anyone makes, you can record key decision logs, tactical decisions, you have a timeline that you can populate and set prompts for the future to enable you to anticipate things to happen, and you'd have a reminder icon that would be present. You can upload documents to it, and it's a very useful tool on the smaller incidents for debriefing purposes, because it has a timeline and everything is date and time stamped as you progress throughout the incident. So it's a very useful tool to see how well an incident commander performed, and also how the decisions were made at a correct time, and potentially you can back it up with rationale behind the decisions as well.
Right. What was, to your knowledge, was training on the use of CSSs, that's the right expression, delivered throughout the LFB in the period leading up to Grenfell?
It was delivered to me 5 years prior, and to other command unit staff within their first initial weeks. There is no continuation training.
Right. 5 years prior to Grenfell? So.
Yes. But it's a system that you're expected to use daily. It's a system that you are expected to refresh yourself on continually. Right. And it was something that I'd attempt to use at every incident. Sometimes it was successful, sometimes it was brilliant, sometimes, unfortunately, it did let us down.
Right. You then go on to, in your list, to describe the webcam facility, and you say that doesn't work.
Yeah.
Who is intended to be using that webcam facility?
So again, you can record certain decisions. You can record a tactical coordination group meeting, TCGM or Silver meeting, or you could just record somebody coming on, giving you a vital piece of information that needs to be recorded.
Who had intended to be looking in remotely at what the webcam was picking up?
So the webcam, in reality, is more designed for recording purposes rather than for people to remotely monitor. The CSS itself is you have the facility for anyone remotely to monitor the whole program. So the whole program is, for want of a better word, a package of other little programs within it. So if a large incident is occurring, prior to someone attending, someone monitoring remotely, excuse me, they can log on to CSS and see what's happened. Or if it is a large incident and you're expected to be going to attend this large incident as a relief potentially, then you can see what's happened, what would be anticipated, what would be expected, what kind of thing would be happening, and photographs will be uploaded as well to give you an idea of what you've seen and what you're expecting to see, to give you a kind of a tactical decision in your brain and start to think about what you can offer when you arrive.
Would it have been functionally possible for those in the control room to access the webcam facility, if it had been working, in order to see what was happening on the incident ground, obviously depending on where the camera was placed?
No.
Yes.
No. For something like that,
why is that?
For something like that, you'd probably need a striker camera.
Oh, you mentioned striker camera in your first item in your shopping list, on a tripod that raises up to a height of 20 feet. Is that used regularly in the brigade, or?
Well, it doesn't work, so no.
You say it doesn't work. What is it about it that doesn't work?
Again, it was an IT glitch. It was tested. It's a fantastic piece of kit. It's military-grade kit used for remotely monitoring incidents, and you can place it somewhere, walk away, safe in the knowledge that it will record. You can tilt it, you can zoom in, you can zoom out. Unfortunately, due to the IT systems that were installed on our command units, it never worked.
Can you elaborate a bit? What was it about the connection between the IT
You'd have to speak to our IT systems to get to the bottom. But I was involved in testing of it. It's a fantastic camera. I was very impressed by it, but ultimately it never worked.
You then go on in your shopping list over the page, we've discussed Vector, to mention a webmail service and video player, and you say that is very temperamental. Could you just elaborate for us, what is the webmail service and the video player?
Excuse me again. That enables officers or anyone with an email account to be able to log into webmail remotely. Most officers all officers have a mobile phone, and they can send and receive emails, or you could send in a picture, email a picture in, and then get it up onto the screen, which would give you a better understanding of what you're seeing, for example. The video player, again, due to restrictions and due to the fact that we were running a very outdated version of Windows, it didn't quite have the correct permissions sometimes to view video.
Right. You say it's very temperamental.
Yeah.
What do you mean? How is it?
So I remember there was a period of 5 or 6 months a few years ago where we had no internet access on the command units, and it would just not work. We'd continually send requests for it to work, because sometimes at incidents we can get vital information is required via the internet, via Google, or via the planning, or for just give you a better understanding of the incident. And if we had no internet access, if we had no webmail service, then that would then put us on the back foot.
And then you talk about whiteboards and pens, and those did work.
Yes. Yes.
Can I just now ask you some questions on policy number 541, and I'm pausing only because I'm not sure that's made it into the policy bundle that everybody else has. The reference is LFB quintuple 0232. And I want to ask you, first of all, are you familiar with this policy?
Yes.
This is the one reviewed as current as at 15th of April 2014. And it's owned by the head of Incident Command Policy and Operations Review Team. Just to be clear, that was it a team in which you sat, or was it?
That is the team that I'm currently in.
It's the team you're currently in?
Yes.
Were you on that team in April 14?
No.
Can I just ask you, when did you join that team?
May the 4th this year.
This year?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, first of all, are you familiar with this policy?
Yes.
Right. Can I ask you to look at yes, sorry, can I ask you to go to LFB 23355? I'm sorry, I've just realised that what's on the screen doesn't appear to be the 2014 version, Mr. Johnson, so could you just bear with me? LFB 23355. This is the one that was in force at the time. There it is. It's gone back to April 2014, which is what we were on. Now, repeat the question, I will. Are you familiar with this policy, the one that was reviewed as current as at April 14 and was in force at the time of the Grenfell fire?
I'm familiar with it, but I wouldn't say that I know it verbatim.
No. Now, can I ask you first of all to turn to internal page 3. Which is also page 3 of the exhibit. it describes the functions there of an incident command pump. And there is, on the next page, a picture, 3.2, a picture of 3.1, in fact, as well. And at 3.2, just above 3.2, there is a photograph of a command unit. And at 3.2, it says the command area is accessed by a door located on the near side of the vehicle body. The near side of the vehicle also incorporates an external 32-inch touchscreen that can display all of the information available on the internal computer systems. This provides a briefing area for crews and officers at an incident. And there's the picture underneath it, which shows two firefighters and a watch manager standing by what looks like the external screen. First of all, was this facility something which was available or in force at the time of the Grenfell Tower fire?
The briefing from that screen?
Yes.
I've only ever seen it once on any incident I've ever been on. And it wasn't used at Grenfell, no.
Wasn't used at Grenfell. Was it physically available?
Yes.
Right. Is there a reason, do you know why it wasn't used at Grenfell?
The command unit that I was on specifically was significantly remote from the scene.
Right.
To give a briefing there would be unrealistic, and by the time anyone would have been committed to the incident, due to the travel distance, information could have changed, or the operational plan would have changed significantly, potentially.
Right. What internal computer system, can you just help me, what internal computer system on the CU is reflected by this external touchscreen?
So it can be any computer system that's on the CU. It's a touch screen. It's the same as what you can see here. You can put whatever you want on there if it's on the CU.
I see. And I think you said, as far as you're concerned, it wasn't used by you on the night.
It wasn't used by anyone on the night.
Or by anybody else on the night. Was it actually physically working? Do you know? Or do you
yes, it would have been working. Absolutely.
Right. Okay. Would it have helped if it had been used in any way?
I can't think of any scenario that would have been a benefit.
Okay. Now, at 3.8, if I could just ask you to look on to the next page, page 5. The policy has a paragraph headed Incident Communications, and it goes on to say the CU has the following communication facilities. And then we see, third bullet point down, a leaky feeder cable for enhancing radio communications at subsurface incidents or where communications are difficult. Do you know whether the leaky feeders were available on command units at the time of the fire generally?
Yes.
They were. Do you know whether they were used on the night?
Yes, I do. They weren't.
They weren't?
No.
Do you know why they weren't?
Because that's since been superseded by a repeater system, a radio repeater system.
So are you saying that in 2017 leaky feeders were not used, repeaters were?
I believe repeaters were put in place, but I can't attest to their success.
Okay. Well, we'll come back to radio communications shortly. But just continuing with this policy for the moment. Can you look at the next bullet point, please? Mattel field telephone and cable for point-to-point wired communications. Do you know if the CU you were on had a Mattel field telephone?
The CU that I arrived on did.
That's CU2?
Yes, that's correct. I can't attest to whether there was one available on the CU I was working on, but I would assume that it would be there, yes.
Do you know whether it was used or not?
To the best of my knowledge, it was not used, but again, I can't see any circumstance where it would have been used and would have been a benefit.
Right. It might be suggested that it might be of use in communicating directly with the bridgehead.
From where?
From the command unit.
No, the distance would have been too great.
What distances does it... over what distances does it work?
I believe, and I wouldn't swear on this, but I believe it's about 100 metres, and from the command unit to where the bridgehead was significantly further than 100 metres. We had up to 300-400 people walking over that area. We had hose, we had appliances, we had a significant amount of falling debris. We had a huge amount of water. To deploy that in that situation would have been wholly unrealistic.
And I didn't put the second part of the bullet point to you. Cable for point-to-point wired communications. Does that show that this is actually essentially a kind of landline? It's a cable. It's a physically linked network.
If you can imagine a Second World War film where someone's winding up a radio, it is similar to that.
Right. Okay. Now then, it then says in the next bullet point a downlink capability to view images from the MPS helicopter. Do you know whether that was working on the night?
It was working, yes.
Was it used?
The signal was scrambled by the MPS.
Was there any way in which the CU could know what the police helicopter was doing?
Yes. If they'd unscrambled it, I repeatedly asked for the image to be available, and they said it's transmitting, it's on this channel, it's on another channel. They tried it on at least 2 CUs, but unbeknown to us, the MPS had scrambled it without making us aware of that.
When did you discover that they'd scrambled it?
My time frame is very hazy, but I would suggest around 10, 10:30 in the morning.
Right. How did you find out that the MPS had scrambled?
So the frustration with the CSS is that CSS isn't going to work. Sometimes the downlink, the heli-tele as it's called, wouldn't work. You try it 2 or 3 times, you give up out of frustration. There is no way specifically to know whether it's an IT failure on our side or if it's a failure within, or if it has been scrambled by the MPS. I asked 3 or 4 times different police officers of different ranks, can we get it? And they said it's transmitting. If I'm being told it's transmitting and I've tried 2, 3, 4 times, the assumption is that it's a problem our end rather than that they haven't unscrambled it.
Did somebody tell you that the MPS had scrambled the message?
They did at around 10:30, yes.
Who told you?
I don't have the name of that individual, but it was a member of the police service. I would suggest Inspector rank or above.
Was that at a meeting?
No, I believe they came on and said if you can try heli-tele now, it has been scrambled, you can view it now. So quite late on in the day, we had facilities to view the heli-tele.
So the police officer came onto the command unit and told you that?
That's correct.
You say I would suggest Inspector rank or above. Do you remember?
I don't remember, and if you lined up 200 police officers in front of me, there's no way I could pick any of them. But I would suggest it was Inspector rank or above due to the high-ranking officers that were on the command unit at that time.
Right. Now, is the scrambling of a MPS heli-tele message something you've experienced before Grenfell?
In truth, no. They may have done it previously, but again, it could have been an assumption that... in reality, I've used it 5 or 6 times in the past, and every time I've used it in the past, it's always worked.
Right.
So there is no way to assume that it would have, or even consider that it's been scrambled. It's the access to the heli-tele itself is not something that's available to the layperson on the street. Right. It is a dedicated channel and repeater of what the helicopter is viewing from live pictures.
Do you know why the MPS scrambled the heli-tele message? Did you ask?
I think my frustration at that time was just to move on and see if we can benefit from what we're seeing.
Right. Did you raise the fact, as you've just told us, that the MPS had scrambled the message with anybody at the LFB?
No. It may have been recorded by the logist who was kept an account of what was going on in the command unit, but I can't I can't confirm that.
Right. The logist. Now, we have a name for the logist at an early stage. It was Jackie McConaughey.
That's correct.
At this stage, 10:30 in the morning, was it still Jackie McConaughey?
I believe so, yes.
Right. Okay. And do you know who else, or can you remember who else was party to or listening to the conversation you had with this inspector or senior police officer about the scrambling of the message?
It wasn't a conversation. I believe he just came on, tried the CSS now. Sorry, as you were. Tried a heli-telly now. Should be working. I tried it. It was working, and he said, to the best of my knowledge, "Oh yeah, sorry about that. It was scrambled." And then that was the end of the conversation.
Right. Did anybody else hear that conversation, or was it just you and this senior police officer?
I can't remember anyone that was there other than myself. But other command units were trying to access heli-telly, so it wasn't it wasn't just myself that was trying to access it. I know that the FSG command unit was trying to access heli-telly, and they just gave up because they couldn't access it.
What about the control room? Do you have any knowledge about that?
I have no knowledge of the control room, no.
Finally, in the bullet point list on page 5 of this policy under paragraph 3.8, it says a message conferencing facility for all users actively logged into an incident accessed via the CSS conferencing system. That was something I think you referred to before, but who would be the people intended to use that facility normally?
It was never used. It was a nice to have. It was kind of a chat room for people on the command units at an incident, but in reality it would have been easier to contact people via the mobile phones on the rear of the command units.
Right. Could it have been used for communications between either of the command units, CU8 or CU7, and the bridgehead?
No. The bridgehead didn't have any CSS access.
No. What about the CU to CU means of communication? Could it have been used for that?
Yes.
Right. Would it have been useful?
I can't imagine a scenario where it would have been.
I want to turn then to a related issue, which is IT. At the top of your statement on page 4, you say that there have historically been connectivity issues. And particularly you say there are dead spots in certain areas in London which affects the signal and connectivity, rendering the whole computer system useless. Are those problems that you've identified here and in the next paragraph of your statement, problems which you yourself ever raised with LFB senior management?
Yes.
More senior management? You did. Who? Can you tell us?
Anyone that would listen, that would be able to. So we had a large turnover of staff. From the day that I joined, I was raising, as it's mentioned, below that connectivity report. It'd probably be more beneficial to mention the connectivity report. So the connectivity report itself was designed for the sole purpose of, is it working? Is the CU working? Now, if it was always working, then you wouldn't need to create a pro forma to ask that question. I don't ever see the need to contact my garage to tell them my car's working. But the amount of faults that were continually happening with the command units was that there was a pro forma started, and every time you went to an incident, you had to tell them whether it was working or not. And as it says in my statement, around 40% of the time, it just wouldn't work.
Right. You say 3 lines up from the bottom of the second main paragraph on page 4, the connectivity report was reintroduced some years later for CSS. It sounds from that as if it was introduced and then taken away and then reintroduced.
So familiarity breeds contempt within the amount of emails that people were sending. If you keep sending the same email 20 times in a 2-month period and nothing's changed, there's not really a great there's not really a great need to keep sending that email. They've got the evidence they need, but it's unfortunately not being acted upon. So we were told to stop sending the connectivity reports, and then, as it's mentioned there, due to a change in management, a change in senior management, it was requested that more connectivity reports were started and sent again.
When were they reintroduced?
I can't give you that date. I would hazard a guess round about end of 2015, 2016.
Right. And to your knowledge, was there a system for dealing with those issues that are raised in connectivity reports?
So connectivity reports, yes, should be recorded and sent. As has been mentioned continually by other people, our IT department isn't renowned for dealing with issues, and as such, all of the issues that were reported by various people weren't dealt with, weren't sorted, and to this day are repeated.
Did these IT issues, in your own personal experience, ever adversely affect command unit performance at an incident?
Yes.
Can you give us some instances?
I can give you 40% of every incident that went on. The CSS didn't work. The whole purpose of CSS is to record the officer in charge's decisions. It's a recording tool, it's a accountability tool, and as such, if it doesn't work, then it's not doing what it's designed for. That's not to say that the crew themselves weren't performing to a high level, and they can record decisions using the whiteboards, using the headline board, but the CSS program itself was very poor and had a continual habit of failing.
And are those issues you experienced things that you raised in connectivity reports once they were reintroduced?
I did it originally, and I did it when they were reintroduced.
Right. Can I now turn to the night of the fire, which starts on page 6 of your statement. Now, on that night, and we could take this quite quickly, you were riding CU2.
That's correct.
And you were with watch manager Patrick Delaney.
Yes, that's correct.
And you were the team leader, I think, of CU2.
That's correct.
Now, 3/4 of the way down page 6, you say that when you started your shift at 2000 hours, you started up the systems, and you say in the third line there, you began the shift by testing the equipment on the appliance. We test all the computer systems that are relevant, such as CSS, HeliTele, Internet Access. We started up the systems and ensured we had connections to all the relevant programs. Now, just pausing there, is it the case that all the IT systems that are supplied on your CU2 worked effectively at that point?
At that point in the bay, so within
Yes.
each command unit, within each fire station, we have a closed Wi-Fi network. So we were testing it upon Wi-Fi. We were not testing it with a cellular signal.
Okay. Did that test include the Toughbook, the mesh node, and the CSS?
No, we never test the Toughbook. They were only kept on there for security reasons. The mesh node doesn't work, it's never worked, never been trained on how to use it, so I wouldn't test it.
Okay. Now, you then go on to say in the next paragraph, however, it turned out that at Grenfell and other large-scale incidents, the systems did not work due to the server and the 3G signal not being able to handle the amount of information and high number of logons at one time. Just breaking that down a little bit, which exact systems worked when you tested them at the base but didn't work when you got to the incident?
CSS didn't work at the incident, and again, I wasn't on my command unit, so
yes.
I was on another command unit. I was on Wembley's. CSS didn't work on Wembley's. HeliTele did work on Wembley's, but ultimately the signal was scrambled. Internet access was intermittent and did ultimately work, as I did receive emails concerning the incident.
Right. Now, you say that due to the server and the 3G signal not being able to handle the amount of information, that caused problems. Were the problems capacity overload for this incident, or were they intrinsic failures of design and performance in those electronic?
It's the latter.
It's the latter. And is there anything you want to add to what we've discussed earlier this morning about those, in order to elaborate on?
So I'm no IT expert. I'm relatively clued up on IT issues, but I'm no expert. I'm just repeating what I've been told. It may be that ultimately there's something completely different, but my understanding is that the server, the signal, the amount of, and from my experience, anything above a 6-pump incident, it just has a complete meltdown and can't handle it.
Now, you were assigned to the incident at 1:38 hours, and you were mobilised to a 25-pump fire. That is essentially what you say on page 7. And if you go to page 9 of the short incident log, please, which is at tab 23 of our documents bundle. Page 9. We can see that CU2 was mobile at 0140 hours. It's about a quarter of the way down that page. We've got it highlighted there. And then on scene at 0158:45. Does that sound right to you?
Yes.
Now, on page 7 of your witness statement, you say that when you got to the incident, you parked on Walmer Road. To the best of your recollection, how far roughly was that from the tower?
I'd estimate probably, as it says in my statement, 150 to 200 metres.
And yes, I mean, your statement at the bottom of page 7 it says that at about 150 or 200 metres after that, which looks like it's after you got through the traffic.
Oh, apologies, yeah. So, yeah, it was probably 300 metres. I mean, I did have a Google Maps picture of
Yes.
it, which would better describe the exact distance.
Okay. Now, you knew, I think, that there were already 2 command units on scene.
Yes.
Did you know where they were parked?
No.
Did you know what they were doing?
I didn't categorically know what they were doing, but I know what would have been expected of their role to be, and has always been at any incident I've been to.
Which is?
To do the main incident command, and for a secondary one to be FSG.
Right. At that stage, the point of arrival at 1:58, did you have any idea of the volume and intensity of FSG calls?
At the time of arrival?
Yes.
I remember hearing the radio on the way to the incident,
Yes.
and a number of FSGs being passed across. I believe I grabbed a pad to make secondary notes in case, as has happened in the past, control can contact an oncoming appliance. In my instance, would be most likely a CU in case they started to ask us points. I believe I made some rudimentary notes in case when I arrived the information had not been correctly recorded. Right.
Do you remember what happened to that pad, all those secondary notes?
I left it on the CU, and it was discarded ultimately. You wouldn't have been able to read it. We were travelling at speed, and it would have been very roughly written.
Right. Do you remember the kinds of things you wrote down?
I believe it was flat numbers and persons.
Right. And you were writing those down as you heard them over the, is this right, the main scheme radio?
Yes, that's correct.
I see. Who was driving? Was it
Pat Delaney, yeah.
So you were able to grab a pen and write?
Yes.
And you say, as you did a moment ago, that they would have been discarded. Do you mean discarded, left in the CU, or destroyed?
I can't actually remember specifically, but my best recollection would be that they would be left on the CU, on CU2, because people were answering the information. It was being passed on to somebody. I can't remember specifically who, but it was being. If it wasn't being answered, then I would have been able to take that information and use it in a useful fashion.
What would you have done?
I would have taken over the FSG or assisted with the FSG command unit.
On arrival?
Yes.
Not remotely?
No.
Right. Okay. Now, On arrival, did you know what you would be tasked to do?
No.
Did anybody have overall command of the use and deployment of the now 3 command units in attendance at just before 2 a.m.?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah. Did anybody have overall command of the use and deployment of all 3 command units at this point?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, let me try it again. You have 3 command units now in attendance.
Yes.
You're the last to arrive. You're the third to arrive.
Yes.
Just before 2 o'clock.
Yes.
To your knowledge, was anybody overseeing how all 3 command units should be used?
No, but then there is no one to do that role. That's not a role that is expected within the fire brigade, or one that I'm familiar with.
So who decides which command unit does what?
So the initial command unit, which is tipped out, would be the incident command unit. You've also got the option that if so, and FSG is carrying on, it's up to the officer in charge to redesignate potentially the command unit to take the role of FSG. And if FSG is occurring, then the second command unit will be mobilised. That second command unit can then come on and do exclusively FSG, or vice versa if that role has been passed on. Due to the incident size, a further command unit is ordered to support the other command unit, and then further command units are tipped on dependent upon the size. Their role is to support the other command units.
I see. So did you assume, being the third to arrive, that your role would be in a support role?
Absolutely.
Right. So no one told you to do that. That was just a natural assumption from your experience. Is that right?
That is our role, to
Right.
support.
Okay. Did you leave when you left CU2, having parked it? You tell us that you went from there to check in at the command unit. Do you remember which number that was at that stage?
We initially went to Fulham's command unit because it was the first command unit we came across. There was a few people outside, but as we're command unit individuals, it is normal for us to just go on and introduce ourselves. It was very obvious that that was being set up for another reason, and that being the FSG. I asked, I can't remember who exactly, possibly Dan Merrick, where the main CU was, because we had to book in, and he said it's just around the corner, and that's when I went to Wembley's command unit, CU7.
Right. Now, there may be a bit of confusion between Wembley and Fulham here, so we need to explore that in just a moment. Just before I do, can I ask you, how long did it take you to go from CU2, where you parked it, to the first command unit that you went to?
I would say the walk probably took 4 or 5 minutes.
4 to 5 minutes. 4 to 5 minutes,
Yes.
right. Did you leave anybody on the command unit, or was it empty when you left it?
It was empty, it was locked up, it was secured. Me and Pat walked together to the incident ground.
Where did he go?
He came with me.
He came with you. Was he with you at all times?
No, I believe it's referenced in my statement. He kind of disappeared. He got given another task or went out to look for a task.
Yes.
And I didn't see him again until the next day.
We'll come back to him later
Later
because
that
he does reappear in the
Sure.
story. Can I now turn to or develop a similar topic, which is your check-in at the first command unit? Now, on page 8 of your statement, you say, it's paragraph 3 in the middle of the page, that you walked past the leisure centre and on Grenfell Road we came across CU7, the command unit from Wembley. And you say, on this command unit was Norman Harrison, and asked him if that was the main command unit, to which he said no. We were directed around the corner to CU8, the command unit from Fulham. This was the main command unit at the time. Now, how soon after you arrived did you get to CU8?
Apologies, I've got CU8 and CU7 around the wrong way there.
I was wondering about that.
Yes,
Okay,
no,
that's helpful.
yeah.
So, you went, so just to be clear, you went to CU8 first.
Yes.
The command unit.
Yes,
You found Norman Harrison on CU8,
yes,
and he said that CU7 was the command unit, and when you went to CU7.
yes.
Right. So we essentially swapped CU7 and CU8.
Yeah,
in your
apologies,
statement.
I got confused.
No, I wondered about that. That's very helpful. Now, just focusing on Norman Harrison, did you see what he was doing on CU8 at the time?
He was on CU8, but he also returned back to CU7. He was gathering information, taking notes from one command unit to the other to prepare to set up the FSG CU.
Right. So when you arrived, is it? I'm going to take this way. Is it right that CU7 was going to be set up for the FSG calls, and information was being taken across?
No. CU8 was being set up. Fulham. If we call it Fulham and Wembley, so Fulham was being set up. Norman Harrison was on Fulham's command unit.
Yes. And
I went round the corner, ultimately, which was the command unit I was on all evening, which was Wembley's command unit.
Yes. I think there is this confusion here. So Fulham is CU8.
Yes.
Wembley is CU7.
Correct.
You go first to CU8, as you've just told us.
Yes. First to Fulham, yes.
Fulham.
Yes.
And my question is, on the Fulham command unit,
Yes.
What was happening? What was Norman Harrison doing?
He was moving backwards and forwards from that. He was on the phone. He had a phone glued to his ear, as did Tony Peckham, and I believe I saw Dan Merrick there.
Yes.
And they were preparing to start that command unit up, Fulham command unit, as the main FSG command unit.
Right. What about CU7? Do you know what was happening with that?
So we walked around the corner from Fulham into Wembley's command unit, where they were hurriedly writing information down and trying to copy as best they can via photographs, mobile phone photographs of stuff that had been recorded up until that point.
Right. Now, why were they doing that?
Because the initial command unit that turned up would have been Wembley. They wanted to change command units and have a dedicated command unit. As I mentioned earlier, if numerous command units are mobilised, it is up to the officer in charge to designate what is what. If you've only got one there, then you can try and do both functions at the same time. With something on the scale of Grenfell, then that would definitely have been advisable.
Now, you just say we're clear. When you arrived at the first command unit you went to, you say you saw it being set up for FSG calls. Were people actually handling FSG calls?
I believe there was somebody on the phone.
Who was that?
That was, I believe Norman was on the phone. That's the only individual that I remember being on the telephone.
You mentioned a moment ago Dan Merrick and Tony Peckham.
Yes.
What were they doing?
Again, I saw them walking backwards and forwards. I had a greater conversation with Dan and Tony when I went on to the other command unit. And I said, "Do you need me on there?" And he went, "No, we're on top of this. We've got this."
Right. You say walking backwards and forwards. Between where were they walking backwards
Between
and forwards?
the two command units. It was approximately 50 metres between the two command units.
Right. Which one, from your recollection, which was nearer the tower, CU8 or CU7?
It would be Fulham's CU8.
Right. Now, you then went. You say you went to round the corner. This is the middle of the same page, page 8, to CU8, the command unit from Fulham. This was the main command unit at the time. We walked on to Bowmore Road and found CU8. Now, is that, to the best of your recollection, being the second unit you visited, was that the one doing FSGs or setting up for FSGs, or was that the one...
The second command unit that I went to,
yes,
which should read CU7, was the one that was doing incident command and FSG at the same time.
FSG and incident command at the same time?
Yes.
Did it come only to do FSG or only to do incident command after a time?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Right. Who did you see there on the second command unit?
Andy O'Loughlin was there, Dan Merrick was there, Tom Goodall was there at that period of time.
Right. Did you see Group Manager Welch at any point? You didn't?
No.
Did he ever arrive when you were on that CU?
I never saw Group Manager Welch that evening except at the base of the tower.
Right. What about Station Manager Loft?
I didn't see Station Manager Loft
Do you know
that
him?
evening. I do, yes.
You do. You'd be able to recognise him if...
I travelled in with him this morning.
Right. I take it that wasn't the first introduction.
No.
Did anybody give you any command instructions when you arrived at the second command unit?
No.
Fulham command unit, you said?
No. I asked where the team leader was, and they said they were out on the incident ground. And as such, I said, is there anything I can do? And I believe I answered. The radio was quite frantic at that time, and I was answering the radio messages.
Right. And you do say that in the next paragraph. I just wonder, Mr. Chairman, we've been going for just about an hour, and I'm going to start exploring this topic a little bit more. Is that a convenient moment for a break, or we can carry on happily if we need to?
I'm totally fine if you want to carry on. We can.
Well, should we try and go on a bit longer?
Very well,
we can
certainly.
give ourselves a slightly longer break.
Certainly.
We do that.
Certainly.
Yes. Okay.
Just before we do, I wonder if we can just iron out this CU7, CU8, Fulham, Wembley possible confusion.
Sure.
We've had other evidence about the roles of each and how one changed to the other. And I just wonder, looking back at your statement...
Sorry, I am correct. So apologies.
In your statement, you are correct.
In my statement, I am correct, and please disregard the confusion from prior. I've just remembered, because I went to Wembley the following night, and the command unit, which was the main FSG command unit, was there but was locked. So apologies for any confusion.
So you're
about that.
No, that's very helpful. I didn't have to work too hard.
I don't know how it happened. I've been reading that last few days, and it just must have confused myself.
So that we're clear, the first one you go to was CU7. That was being set up for
That's
FSG,
correct.
and then you
Absolutely.
went to the OIC command unit.
Yes.
Very
Yes.
good. Now, on that unit, you say in the last paragraph on page 8, Pat and I introduced ourselves to CU8, saying we were from Islington, and asked what we can do. The officer in charge at the time was Andy O'Loughlin. Do you know how long he'd been there when you got onto that command unit?
I don't know.
Okay, you then say also on the command unit was watch manager Dan Merrick, Tom Goodall, and a couple of others whom I did not know or remember. Then you say, I answered the main scheme radio for the first few minutes using channel Flonops 4, and you explain that. I was receiving fire survival call information from our control room concerning people within the tower. Now, first of all, was anybody else doing that, receiving FSG information from control when you arrived?
When I arrived?
Yes, on the CU8.
Other than seeing Norman with a phone, who was talking, I believe, to control, I didn't see anybody on the command unit doing that, no.
That was on CU7, though?
That's correct.
Yes, when you got to CU8, which is, I think, what you're talking about in this paragraph, who did you see also taking FSG calls from control?
So Dan Merrick was in the process of moving boards from one command unit to the other, which would have left the command unit without any CU personnel. So I was the person that said, I'll take over the radios, or just without speaking, just took over the radios.
I see. And so they were moving from CU8 to CU7 to do FSG, to summarise what you've said, I hope fairly. Why did you take over the FSG call receiving function?
Because there wasn't anybody else to do it at that time. So the incident command CU is very obvious, and the role of that, and the FSG command unit is very obvious, but there would be a period of time between the two for them to be set up, and I know that just by helping out, just by moving between the two and myself taking the radio, it would be for a short period of time before the other command unit would be set up as the main FSG. So I stepped in, which for a period of time that I would assume or would expect to be no more than 1 or 2 minutes.
How long was it in the end?
No more than 1 or 2 minutes.
So how many FSG calls do you think you dealt with or received?
I can imagine I would have written down maybe 2.
Right. What would you have written them down on?
On the FSG pad.
That's the quadruplicate, multicoloured control information form pad.
That's correct.
what then happened to the pieces of paper that you wrote that information down on?
They were passed on to, once the FSG command unit was ready to be set up, I believe Dan Merrick came back and I said, look, I've got these, you need to look at these. And he said, yeah.
So you handed them to Dan Merrick?
Yeah, but there was a lot of repetition, so maybe this information had been passed on previously. So I'm not sure, but I think Dan may have said, oh yeah, we've got that one. As in we have the information for that specific call.
Right. Do you remember any information for specific flats?
I do not know.
Particular flats, you don't. Do you remember any generically information for particular flats changing or being updated?
In the period of time, as I said, there was a very brief period of time where they had very little information, as you were, very little amount of flats that were highlighted at that period of time.
Right. Did you receive those messages via the, well, you said by radio?
Yes.
So you were sitting at the radio control desk, were you, in the CU? As
I went on, the radio was being called, and then I didn't sit down, but I just grabbed it and spoke and said, Charlie Uniform 7. Right.
Okay. Did you send any informative or any other radio message at that point?
I devised an informative message for DAC O'Loughlin.
Right. Going back to this question of the written down FSG information on one of the sheets, what colour was the sheet that you gave Dan Merrick?
Well, the top sheet is white, so I would have passed all the information to him because he was the individual responsible and the CU is responsible, and then it's up to them and the officer in charge of the FSG to disseminate the coloured pieces of paper. But as I said, I believe he said to me, we've got that one.
Right.
As in we've got the information already on concerning that individual.
When you filled out the form, do you remember writing a time mark? Do you remember writing the time?
Again, I don't remember any specifics about writing that down. And, and again, it was repeated.
Okay.
Evidence or information that had already been passed on.
And do you know what happened, what Dan Merrick did with the pieces of paper?
He took it onto the CU.
You don't know what happened to them after that?
I never attended that CU for the rest of the evening.
Right. From what you could observe on CU8 when you arrived on it, was anybody in radio contact with the bridgehead?
I did not observe anyone in radio contact. I got on one step, and I couldn't see further than that. It was a hectic scene. It was a busy scene.
Busy scene. Right. Going on to page 9 of your statement, in the third paragraph, you say there that you saw Watch Manager Kentfield coming onto the command unit, and you say he wasn't in a good state. He was struggling to walk, bright red in the face and under an extreme amount of stress. And you say that that was due to the heat and dynamic incident and clearly needed to sit down and recover. First of all, was this before or was this after Watch Manager Merrick and Group Manager Goodall had gone to CU7?
That was after.
It was after. Do you know whether Watch Manager Kentfield actually went into the tower?
I believe he did, yes.
You think he did? Do you know... Well, let me ask you this. Are you trained to identify signs of metabolic heat stress in firefighters?
Specifically as a CU personnel?
Yes. Well, as a member of the London Fire Brigade?
Yes.
You are. From what you know from that training and your own experience, did you think that Mark Kentfield was suffering from metabolic heat stress?
I now know that he had an underlying medical condition that was not metabolic heat stress.
I see. Okay, we won't talk about that. Do you know where he had been or what he'd been doing?
He'd been on the incident ground, trying to gather information that would assist him within his role as a team leader.
Right. Do you know why CU7 was chosen to be the FSG command unit?
I do not.
You don't. You then go on to say, in your statement in the same paragraph, I discussed with Mark whether he wanted me to take over and become team leader for the main command unit, CU8. We agreed that this would be for the best and it was then my role to facilitate the officer in charge for the time I was there. When you say facilitate the officer in charge, do you mean support?
Staff, yes.
Right. And then you say you introduced yourself to Deputy Assistant Commissioner Andy O'Loughlin and explained to him that I was taking over the team leader role on the command unit. Did he agree?
I don't believe there was any question about not accepting that. There was no questioning.
And so far as you could observe, what was DAC O'Loughlin doing?
He was listening to radio messages, listening to incoming information. He was, after I'd formulated an informative message, I gave it to him. He was trying to get a map and a plan. He wanted to try and get an understanding of the overall incident itself.
Leaving aside the very few FSG calls that you handled when you first arrived on CU8, do you remember whether you or anybody else on CU8 handled any further FSG calls after that?
I don't believe we did.
Once CU7 took over running FSG calls, did you on CU8, or to your knowledge anybody else on CU8, get any updates from CU7
Continually.
About FSG calls?
Continually throughout the night.
Right. How was that done? Through what means of communication?
All communications that was available to us. So it would be mobile phone, be radio,
Right.
it would be main scheme radio using the FLONOPS channels.
Right. Was there a problem with communication, or was it smooth and seamless?
Between us and the other
Between
command
us,
unit?
yes.
Specifically, I can't remember. I'm fully aware that they had an incredibly hard job, an incredibly important job, one that would not have been beneficial by me interrupting them to get updates on something that was information that was available elsewhere.
And what did you and your team do on CU8 with the FSG information that you were continually getting from CU7?
It was to update the officer in charge to ensure that he could update the incident plan.
And did you update the officer in charge with that information?
Continually.
Was that you who did that?
Yes. It would have been myself, or it could have been. I could have devolved that task to another member of the CU that was working alongside me.
Right. When it was you, what did you tell DAC O'Loughlin or the officer in charge?
Again, it wasn't. The bulk of my information was not coming from the other CU. It was coming from the bridgehead or from intermediaries or from the marshalling officers. It wasn't coming from that CU.
How did the officer in charge update the incident plan using FSG information or updates that had come from CU7?
That's a very complicated question. The officer in charge themselves has an overall control of the incident, and they have devolved responsibilities for each sectors, as has previously been discussed in these hearings. The officer in charge at that point would be able to increase personnel to certain areas, increase the amount of the brigade presence. If we need to redirect resources, that would something that the officer in charge can do as well. But it's not done solely as the officer in charge's decision. It is done within the command structure, within the FSG, with the bridgehead, with the lobby sector, with the marshalling sector, with the BA sector, with the BA main control sector, and again with the FSG sector.
That's a lot of sectors for the officer in charge to oversee and brief.
With an ops, there would be responsibility of an ops commander, which DAC O'Loughlin later became.
Yes, but prior to him becoming ops commander, well, let me ask you this: when he became ops commander, who was OIC?
That would be AC Andy Rowe.
Andy Rowe. Prior to Andy Rowe taking over as incident commander, then, so we're talking about the period between 215 or so and perhaps 244. We'll have to explore those times with others, perhaps. But at that time, what did DAC O'Loughlin do by way of making use of the FSG information in updating his plan? How did things change based on that information?
I can't specifically answer to that question. That was a question you need to put to DAC O'Loughlin. All I know is that as described, that the huge amount of information coming in needs to be collated and passed on. And DSA O'Loughlin was performing at a very high level in an incredibly difficult situation.
Right. Who was the contact point on CU8 for receiving FSG information or information about FSGs from CU7? Was that you, or was that anybody else?
As the team leader, any CU person on there.
And how did you, as team leader, pass that information to DAC O'Loughlin?
In that period of time, due to the setting up and due to the great amount of information, DAC O'Loughlin would have just had the information and let them set themselves up, let themselves get into a position before they're ready to pass that information on. Excuse me. Would I be the person? Yes, I possibly could have been the person. I have a very poor memory of the time of DAC O'Loughlin being in charge. For me, in my memory, it lasted minutes.
Right, okay. Do you remember whether DAC O'Loughlin or Andy Rowe, when he took over as incident commander, reacting in any way to FSG information and changing the plan, whether it's deployment or whether it's resourcing or anything like that, in order to deal with the updated information as it had come from CU7?
Again, that's a complicated question, because the information coming in specifically to him wouldn't enable him to specifically change the information. So if there needed to be resources to be redirected, you'd have to understand, well, what resources are currently deployed? What are those resources? What resources do we have in reserve? What is the plan? Have those. So, for example, if someone had been sent to floor 15 but had been redirected to floor 12 by discovering somebody, then that feeds back into the plan. The officer in charge is someone that takes an overall much more strategic view of the incident rather than getting caught in the minutiae of specific, singular FSG calls.
Were you aware, and I'm just asking you for your own experience and memory, were you aware of any difficulties of communication about FSG deployments, BA deployments, in response to FSG calls coming back from the bridgehead?
In what respect?
Well, let me ask a question in a slightly different way. Were you aware of any difficulties in getting information from the bridgehead about the success or failure of any deployments?
There were communication difficulties throughout the evening from
were you
different parts.
Yeah. Were you aware of any gaps in information about particular deployments in response to FSG information you had?
There was gaps of information about every single thing due to the huge amount of information coming in. We had hundreds of people with vested interests with information that each individual felt was vitally important. How that feeds into the tactical plan, how that feeds into the officer in charge is something that needs to be collated. But yes, there were communication problems throughout the night, which has already been explored throughout this hearing.
Yes. Mr. Chairman, we're going to turn to a different subject, or slightly different subject. And I'm conscious that the witness has been going for an hour and a quarter.
Yes, all right. Well, would you like to have a break now?
I think the witness might.
I'm fine. I'll carry on.
Well, we normally do have a break in the middle of the morning. Sorry?
It's also the transcribers I'm thinking of as well.
Yeah, yes, of course. Important too. All right, well, we'll have a break now.
Okay.
Quarter of an hour. Can we spare a quarter of an hour, Mr. Millett?
We can. Yes, we can.
Right, okay. Well, then we'll have a quarter of an hour's break. Come back at 11 o'clock, please. And, of course, don't talk to anyone about your evidence while you're out of the room.
Thank you very much.
Right, thank you very much. I'd like to go to the usher. Right. Can I have a word with Sam?
Yes, absolutely.
Right, 11 o'clock, please. Thank you. All right. Yes, Mr. Philip. Well, should we have Mr. Johnson back then, please? Thanks. Yes, Mr. Johnson, happy to continue, I hope.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Minute? Yes.
Mr. Johnson, thank you very much for coming back to us. Can I ask you to look at page 9 of your statement, please, and go to the bottom of the page, where in the paragraph which starts shortly after that, 3 lines up from the bottom, you say, I composed another informative message stating that Assistant Commissioner Andy Rowe had taken over as the officer in charge of the incident. This was composed to inform control and others across the incident ground. Can I ask you to look at what we call the second hour ORR, which is an LFB composite document, which is LFB 0004828, and go to page 208. And at 2:39:17, once we get to it, it's LFB 0004828, internal page 208, document number 209, or document page 209. Yeah, it's actually the next page. Thank you, that's lovely. Now, at 2:39:17, no, that is my fault. Can you go back, if we can just go back a page. At 2:39:17, we see just halfway down the page, it says CU8 send informative message to the radio operator at Brigade Control. Charlie Uniform 8, informative message from DAC O'Loughlin, fire on all floors from 2nd to 27th floor. Large number of persons involved, FSG calls being dealt with, major incident declared, high-rise procedure implemented, TL, ALP, EDBA, main control FSG, ground monitor 5 jets, safety cordon in place, tactical mode Oscar, Charlie Uniform 8, over. Is that your message?
I believe so, yes.
And at the foot of page 9, you say that AC Rowe came on board and assumed command, and then you sent another informative message to say he'd taken charge. If you turn on to page 218 in the same document, or if you could please be shown that, 218. That's it, 218. You can see at 2:43:51, a third of the way down the page, there's an informative message to the radio operator at Brigade Control. Charlie Uniform 8, for your information, AC Andy Rowe is now incident commander of this incident, tactical mode Oscar, Charlie Uniform 8. Is that your message?
Yes.
Right. And then there's another message actually sent earlier on, which says that DAC O'Loughlin was the officer in charge, and that if you go to page 144, if you can please be shown page 144 of the same document, I just want to ask you whether this is yours as well. Page 144. Doing this. at 2, it's the next page, I think. If we could just be shown the next page, we can see that at
Bottom of the previous page.
bottom of the previous page. Bottom of the previous page, 2:11:48. CU8 sends informative message to the radio operator at Brigade Control. Charlie Uniform 8, DAC O'Loughlin is now officer in charge of this incident. DAC O'Loughlin, Charlie Uniform 8, over. Again, is that your informative message?
I don't believe so, no.
You don't think that's yours?
No.
Do you know whose it might be?
It would have been Mark Kenfield's.
Mark Kenfield. Was Mark Kenfield on the radio at that stage?
I don't believe I was on the command unit, so I can't attest to that.
I see. So you don't think that at this stage, 2:11, you were yet on CU8?
That's correct.
Right, I see.
Alternatively, he could have got over Channel 10 and informed someone to send that message, but I'm confident I didn't send that message.
Now, we could take that off. We could take that off the screen and move to a different point. In your statement at the top of page 10, you refer again to the CSS, and you say in the third line there it wasn't working and hadn't worked during the entire incident. I said I'd come back to this. Can I ask you to look at a document which is MET 000018246? Which is, or should be when it comes onto the screen, Andy Rowe's decision log taken by Jackie McConaughey, and it's in fact an exhibit to her statement. But I just want to show you this, see if you remember anything about it. It's MET 000018246.
I think there's a problem, Mr. Millett.
Let me try a different reference. MET quadruple 05404. This document appears in a number of places, so it may be that particular reference isn't right. That's it. That's the document. And if I can ask you to go to the time mark at 4:03, which is on page 3. In fact, if one can go back a page, I'm sorry, that's a different reference. If one goes back one page, not having much luck this morning.
Right.
That's it. Now, in the entry 3 from the bottom, at 0403 it says, command support system has gone down. Do you remember being at a meeting when this was recorded?
No.
You don't? Do you remember anything about the CSS system or a CSS system going down?
So when I first went onto the command unit, in between taking telephone calls and radio calls, I tried to get CSS to start, turned it on, turned it off a few times. So this would have it's been approximately 2:20, 2:30 in the morning.
Right.
But as I say in my statement, it never worked. That may have just been a formal recording of the fact that it has gone down.
Right. Okay. But you can't help us further with that.
Why it was recorded at that time, probably just to formalise the fact that it wasn't working.
Right. Now, you then say that you moved on to the headline board on CU8, I just want to show you a number of photographs, if I can, just to see if you can help us with them. And if you can't, we'll just move swiftly on. First of all, could you please be shown MET quadruple 08722? Now, this was on CU8. Does this look familiar to you?
Yes.
What is it? Do you know?
So it's the headline board, which details who's in charge and the sectors.
Right. And can you just explain the sectors for us there?
So you've got BA sectors. At the top there, you've got the AC, obviously, who's the incident commander, DAC O'Loughlin, who was incident ops commander. You've got the names on the left-hand side, Watch Major Hall, who was at the RVP, Group Major Pugsley, who was fire investigation. Then you have Sanders and Kipling, who were in the BA sector. Marshalling sector, you have Foster. And again, you have another relief RVP. So this would have been later on in the incident. This wasn't an early on
right.
headline board. You also have a water sector, which again, as it says there, Station Major Cook, who directly is reporting to Group Major Godborn and Group Major Welsh.
I see. And roughly what time do you think this would have been?
I would say
created?
I'm confident that's after 6 a.m.
After 6 a.m. Turning to the next photograph, it's 8724, quadruple 08724. Do you know what that is? It's headed Flonops 1. Perhaps it can be expanded a little bit there. And this was on CU. Well, first of all, do you remember this being on CU8? It looks as if it's right next to the board.
Yeah,
we've just
yeah.
looked at,
It's a removable whiteboard that's kept next to the headline board.
Right. Do you know who was writing on this?
That's not my writing.
Do you know whose it is?
I do not know.
And you can see on it that somebody had written or recorded whereas turnover query, cylinders, and then next to that, press area, and then above that in blue, 36 EDBA, 60 EDBA, OS 50 Barling. Can you help us with that?
That would be a running total of EDBA wearers, and OS is outside, 50 Barling.
Yes.
So that would just be a running total that would be pressed on. But to me, that looks like a mind map, so it would be the individual who wrote that would be the best person to attest to what that means to that individual. I would suggest it would be a significantly senior officer, AC or above.
Right. And the connections between, just help me, there are some arrows at the top, starting on the right, CU7 FSG, arrow, CU8 ICV, I assume that means Incident Command Vehicle.
Yes.
And then arrow, Flonops 1, CUSC, is that right, SCCS or SLLS? What is that?
Whereabouts are we looking, sorry?
On the left at the top, the second arrow, which links CU8 via Flonops 1 to something else, CU something. There. Can you just help us with what that CU is? It looks like CU1.
So you've got BCC, which is would be set up at Control, which is at Stratford.
DAC Fenton.
DAC Fenton.
Yes.
Group Manager Leader, who's got Ops next to his name.
Is that in the control room?
Sorry?
Is GM Leader in the Ops in the control room?
Well, I didn't see Group Manager Leader that evening, so...
Group Manager Leader is a person, not a role?
No, it is Steve Leader, yeah.
Steve Leader, okay. And then underneath that CU1, what does that mean?
SCC, I don't know. I've never seen those initials before. But it just details what would be BCC would be remotely planning and will remotely be preparing to come onto the incident.
Right. Can you help? Do you know whether CU8 was in radio contact with any CU other than CU7?
Yes.
Which?
We were in contact with the marshalling CU.
Which CU was that?
I don't know the exact number of it. It may be in my notes, but it was being run by Lee Drawbridge, DAC Drawbridge.
Right. And was that, looking at this, does this help your recollection as to which number it was? 'Cause it looks like it's CU1 SCCS. Can you help with that?
I can't, no.
Right.
C1 would be Lewisham, so... sorry, Edmonton, yeah, possibly.
Edmonton.
But I can't confirm.
No, okay. And it looks from this as if CU8 was in contact with CU7 and CU1, and CU1 was in contact with the Brigade Control Centre. Is that how you remember it?
I was in contact with every CU that was available, every CU operative that night, the officer in charge, the ops commander, people on the bridgehead. I spoke to upwards of 150 people that evening. And I believe that they also spoke to upwards of each individual 150 people as well.
Okay. On the bottom right-hand corner of this board, we see, in brackets with a tick over it, Glenn Williams,
Yep.
G351, Watch Manager. Can you tell us anything about that?
He left the incident.
Is that why that was recorded up there?
Yes. So it would be for roll call purposes.
Right. Looking at the next slide, then, can I ask you to look at 8725, MET quadruple 08725. Do you know what that is?
Yes, that's another whiteboard, and on it is DERV, which is the abbreviation for diesel,
Yes.
to Bramley Road, 4 OSUs, operational support units.
Right.
And then there's a list of appliances that would need DERV, and then Hotel 33 Alpha, who would be responsible for shuttling DERV back and forwards from a petrol station.
Right. Now, on the right-hand side, we see two things. First of all, we see FIB board with an arrow.
Yes.
What does that indicate?
That's where the FIB board was, the forward information board, and that is just to highlight the fact that it's there, but that's not specific to that evening. That would be there forever.
When you say that would be there forever, does that mean that that was a permanent
Yes.
piece of writing on the CU?
Yes, CUs were sometimes stowed differently for certain items of equipment, so that would be if somebody was standing by, if someone from another station needs to find a FIB board, they'd know where it was by the signed FIB board.
I see. Was there a FIB board on CU8?
I really can't remember. It wasn't my CU. I wouldn't have done
Right.
or been responsible for the inventory, but it's something you can certainly find out.
Right. The second thing on the right-hand side is, for the most part, redacted. But do you remember what it was?
That looks like a list of telephone numbers
Right.
for stations.
Stations. Can I ask you to be shown the next photograph, which is quadruple 08726? Can you tell us what this is?
Yes, so again, this looks like something that a senior officer has done for preparation, a mind map for prompts of how they're going to be moving forward with the incident. So again, this would be, as you have marshalling, you've got reliefs, so you've also got a question mark next to that 0600 hours. So to recant my previous statement, the assumption there would be that that's prior to 0600 hours.
Right.
And reliefs, spare appliances, people. So it's prompts to remember. It's the sort of thing that could have been recorded by CSS, but it's a lot more direct and visible representation of what is to be happening or what's expected to be happened.
And can I ask you then to look at 8737? Can you just tell us what that is?
That is a CSS screen
Right.
showing a map of the area.
Do you know, well, does this show us, or does this help tell us that the CSS on CU8 was actually used?
No, that just shows at a time. I don't know if that's specifically on the date. It says incident, it says connection, which would assume that it is connected. Whether it's populated or not is a completely different story. So whether that was fully researchable or whether it's just a picture. What's quite common is that you turn it on and all you've got is just a picture. Nothing. So none of the appliances would be populated, which should automatically occur. If that's the case, to load up 120 appliances and personnel would have taken 2 people up to 3 or 4 hours.
Right. Looking at the next photograph, if I can move on, 8738. It should be in the next one in the sequence. What does... I think we've had some evidence before about what this shows us, and it also seems from the window that it's daylight by this stage. But what do we see in that picture?
You can see the two Toughbooks. You can see all the nominal roll boards that are in attendance.
And I see. So those red things on the left, those are nominal roll boards, are they?
So the red things, we have the racking, which has previously been explained. We have the racking where the boards are to be placed. And next to those, we have the red things with the blue heading,
yes.
Excuse me, which signifies that they are off of all of the appliances, and then they have the name, the number of the individuals that are on there.
Right. Okay. And I see. So is there a distinction between the ones with the blue sitting underneath the Toughbooks and those with the yellow in the racks?
Yeah, the yellow are officers.
Yellow are officers. Okay, right. And so what happens when somebody comes and presents themselves? I say somebody. When an officer comes and presents themselves to the CE,
it can be anyone. It doesn't have to be a member of the fire brigade that can book in. So it can be somebody.
Right. And do they get given a red?
No. Senior officers have all got a nominal roll board, which is their responsibility to hand in. Every appliance has a nominal roll board. Luckily, you've got the window there, so that's the window where normally you would be booking in. And there would be an LED display above that window saying booking in area. And then you would pass the board on, say who you are, what your role was, or why potentially you've been called onto this incident. You can either wait outside, or you could be called on to be briefed or forwarded onto the incident.
And who would fill in the nominal roll board? Would the
all nominal roll boards need to be done at change of watch. The officers' nominal roll boards, obviously, their name doesn't change, so that remains. But every shift, the nominal roll boards, you have a day and a night board. And the day boards are filled in at change of shift at 09:30, or actually, as you were, they are prepared by the off-going watch for the oncoming watch.
In the station?
Yes.
I see. So they're already prepared, and
yes.
When you book in at the CE, you just hand it in?
Yes.
I follow. Next picture, please, which is 0008739. Can you help us? What does that tell us?
Structural engineer, district surveyor. That was an individual that was to be coming on.
Now, interestingly, up on that, we can see on the right, 0247 AC row.
Yeah.
What does that tell us?
That would be potentially the time that AC row booked in to be officer in charge.
Do you know who wrote that up there?
That's not my handwriting.
No, but do you know?
I do not know. No.
You don't know whose it is?
No.
Right.
The rest of the information on there isn't familiar to me either.
Okay.
I know both Steve West and Lee Drawbridge, but...
Right. And John Allen, underneath the word structural engineer, district surveyor, does that tell us that John Allen was the structural engineer or district surveyor?
I don't know.
You don't know. Next picture, please, which is 0008740. Another whiteboard on the CU. What does that tell us, do you think?
So a lot of that is my handwriting.
Oh, can you tell us which?
The red on the lower 2/3 on the right-hand side, which says 12 FOU, 36 pump, 4 area ladder, 9 SM, 8 GM, 1 commissioner, 1 AC.
Right. On the left BA out at the bottom. Is that your handwriting?
That's
as well?
not my handwriting. No, it's far too neat. And on the left-hand side, you have FSG.
What does BA? Sorry, can I just interrupt you and ask you what does BA out signify? Do you know?
I have no idea.
Okay. Sorry. Please carry on.
So casualty, yes, a casualty would be CAS would be how many casualties we would have had, trying to keep a running total at that point in time.
Right. Where were you getting that information from? Do you remember?
From various sources. So, as you can appreciate, not just myself in isolation on the main CU, but other CUs were getting different numbers from different places. So, what we were trying to do is collate them to try and get the most rounded figure and the most accurate figure that we could.
Right. And it says in blue, FSG 133A 38C. Does that?
So that would be 133 adults,
yes,
38 children, giving you a total of 171 in total.
Yes.
Below that is the casualty handling, that would be the casualty handling area, and 115 people that would at that point be unaccounted for. And that's not to say that the two figures should be added together, 115, 171. It could be that 115 are taken from the 171.
Right. Do you remember, first of all, who would have written that on?
That's my handwriting.
That's your handwriting. Do you remember roughly when, during the night, you would have written that up there?
If we could zoom back out again, please. Yeah, so again, that could be between 6 and 10. The amount of casualties that we had confirmed was relatively low for quite some time, unfortunately.
I see. And where were you getting that information from that you recorded there?
So that would be coming back from the bridgehead. That could be coming back from the main FSG CU as well. It's a combination, and they themselves could be passing this information from the bridgehead back to the main FSG command unit and vice versa, so it's kind of a loop. Plus we had a significant amount of people that were runners that were passing on information from the incident ground themselves.
You said in that last answer that you would be getting back information from the bridgehead.
Yes.
What was the method of communication by which the bridgehead was communicating with you in CU8?
There was a multitude of different types of communication. I used handheld radios, we tried to use Flonops 1, and I believe we used mobile phones as well.
So you tried to use Flonops 1, did you succeed?
We did, intermittently, but again, with the amount of people with an interest in using that, it could sometimes become overloaded, and as such we would resort to other methods of communication.
Do you remember who you spoke to personally on
the bridgehead?
Yes.
I spoke to many different people at the bridgehead.
Right.
I spoke to Brian O'Keefe, I spoke to Pat Goldborn. I have one specific memory of speaking to Pat Goldborn, which is when he mentioned to me about the impossibility of going past a certain floor.
Which was the floor, do you remember?
I can reference my notes, but I believe it was floor 11.
Right.
I'd rather confirm it within here, but I remember specifically the phrase that we cannot humanly go past floor 11 with the capabilities and the sets that we have.
Right. Do you remember what you did with that information?
I asked Group Manager Goldborn, now DAC Goldborn, to hold onto the line. The AC was talking, I interrupted him and gave that information to the AC.
Right. Do you think that was recorded in the log by Jackie McConaughey?
Yes.
It was. We may be able to find that. Now, do you know whether that information was passed back to the control room?
I'm not aware if it was passed back, no.
Right. And then finally, in the run of pictures, quadruple 08741. Well, I think that probably tells us everything we need to know. Is there anything you would identify on that picture?
It's an air conditioning unit, but other than that, everything else is self-explanatory.
Well, I won't ask you whether that was working.
It was good.
Right. I'm now going to turn back to your statement, if I can, and ask you to look, please, at the bottom of page 10. In the penultimate paragraph, you say, there was issues with radios early on. I had asked for channel 2 to be switched on across the incident ground. And I'm sorry, Mr. Documents Director, it's the top of the part of the text we've got on the screen there. There was issues with radios quite early on. You say, I had asked for channel 2 to be switched on across the incident ground using a CU repeater which enables channel 2 to be utilised and giving us an extra channel on the handheld radios. Normally we have 10 radio channels, but really only have 9 channels, as channel 2 is only available if you turn it on at the command unit using the CU repeater. We asked for that to be switched on, but it did not work. We've always had issues with that specifically. Now, first question, what were those issues that you were referring to there?
It didn't work. The radio channel 2 wouldn't work.
Did that impact in any way on your ability to perform your role on the night?
No.
How would channel 2 have assisted if you had been able to use it? I can't imagine a scenario where it would have been a benefit. Right. Who did you request should deploy the CU repeater?
I can't remember. I know it was somebody from another command unit, maybe somebody from Woodside Command Unit, who came along and asked for the repeater. And but again, as you can appreciate, on an incredibly busy night, I can't remember the specific person, but they came and asked for the repeater.
Right, you refer to the Woodside Command Unit. Is that Edmonton?
No, it's Woodside, in Woodside,
it's
South
a different
London.
one?
Yeah, yeah.
Right. Which number is that, do you know?
6.
Okay.
Don't quote me on that.
Then you don't know. What effect did the use of the repeater have?
So, as I say within my evidence, Channel 2 is only available when a CU is in attendance.
Right.
Just gives you an extra radio channel. So we would be able to turn Channel 2 on and have an extra radio channel. But having an extra radio channel with all the previous explained ways of communication just gives another way that potentially information can be passed across, but I fail to see any benefit of having one extra radio channel.
Right. I think you've just answered the question that I asked before, but can I just focus on the question I did ask, which was about repeaters?
Yes.
What assistance would, what effect would the use of repeaters have had if they had been working?
It would have enabled Channel 2 to be working.
I see, okay.
So the Channel 2 itself can only be turned on by the CU.
Yes, as you say.
With a CU in attendance, you flick a switch, Channel 2 works. With the radio engineer attending, the hope and the goal there was that he could fix whatever the deficiency was to enable Channel 2 to be working. He couldn't.
And was the use of the airwave radio to communicate with the bridgehead considered?
I believe it was used.
It was used. Was it used effectively?
Yes.
Right. Now, you say in the same paragraph, just halfway down, we asked, or I also asked for someone from radio workshops to attend. And you go on to say, normally at a certain number of pump incidents, we were way above that, they would send a radio engineer to attend, assuming there would be interference with radio communications. They did send someone out on that night. I believe the engineer had a look at this issue and said he couldn't do anything. First of all, is it normal, it does sound as if it is, that over a certain number of pumps, you work on the assumption that the radio communications will be interfered with?
Yeah, that may be, I may be not explaining it correctly within my notes. At a large incident, you'd have a greater demand upon radio channels, so a radio engineer would be able to come out and assist if there were anticipated any issues.
I see. Would it be normal at a large incident, which I think you've defined as over 6 pumps? I don't. A large incident for a radio engineer, I don't believe is above 6 pumps. I believe it's above that. I believe it's 10 and above. 10 and above.
But that's something that I could feed back to you.
Is that a mobilisation?
Yes.
Policy?
Yes.
Right.
PDA.
Okay. And does that tell us that it's normal to dispatch or have ready at least a radio engineer?
Absolutely.
At such incidents? I see. Now, you say you asked for someone from radio workshops to attend. Can I ask you to look at page 25 of the short incident log? Just to see if we can get a handle on the timing of that.
3:44:20.
Yes, 3:55.
44.
Yes, we've got 3:55:04.
The initial call went in at 3:44.
3:44. You say that. Let's look further up the page. 3:44:12. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Right. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And that sounds about the right time you requested one first, is it?
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember or know what time one arrived?
I do not know. It was daylight.
It was daylight. Okay,
Yes.
I wonder if we might be able to pin this down a bit more closely. If you go down to 0355, which is the service request, bottom of the same page, 035504, service request, CU8, request urgent attendance of radio engineer to assist with channel 2 for fireground. Now, that's the service request. We've had some evidence about how these get completed. If you move on to page 32 of the short incident log and look at the time mark there on that page for 05/18/02, service request completed. CU request urgent attendance of radio engineer to assist with channel 2 for fireground. Does that time, 05/18/02, correspond with your recollection as to when the radio engineer arrived? Or would it be before that?
Well, that request is for someone to attend.
Yes.
Yes. So that if what you're saying, and I'm not familiar with the booking in process for the radio engineer, but potentially that could be the time. It was daylight.
Right. Let me see if I can just put one more time mark to you. If you go to page 14 of the short incident log, exactly halfway down the page, we see RW2, Donovan Robert, who is status 2, it looks like, at 04/03. In other words, mobile to incident. Would that correspond with your recollection? 04/03.
That's his mobilisation time. That's not his attendance time.
No,
He
exactly.
hasn't got an attendance time.
It hasn't got an attendance time.
He's got a left time, but not an attendance time.
Yes, it's got an available time and a status, what I've called a status 2 time, mobilised, or mobile to incident.
Yes, but I can't say what time he got there because it in itself does not say what time he got there, and I don't know where the individual was coming from either.
Fair enough. Does the name Robert Donovan mean anything to you?
No, I can describe the individual, but I don't know his name.
Okay. Do you know who briefed him?
I spoke to him.
You spoke to him. What did you ask him to do?
To get radio channel 2 working and see if he can improve any other issues that we have on the fireground concerning communications.
Right. And what did he do? Do you know?
He went away for a period of time, come back and said there's nothing he could do.
Do you know what he did?
I don't know what he did, no.
Okay. When he said there's nothing you can do, what did you say? Did you say anything?
I expressed the urgency that we need increased communications, that it was hampering our efforts. And he said, nothing I can do.
Did anybody hear that conversation? Or were you alone with him?
Other than himself, no.
Right. Did you report what he told you to the OIC?
Yes, confident I did, yes.
Right. And that would have been Andy Rowe, would it?
Yes.
And what did Andy Rowe do about that? Do you know?
I don't know. If the radio engineer tells us he can't do anything, then unfortunately we have to accept that as fact. We can't go to his boss who's got a magic wand that can make the radios work. That's the evidence that we've been given.
Right. Now, you say at the bottom of the page, this is page 10 of your statement, at the time of Grenfell, the command units did not have handheld Firelink radios, Motorola handheld radios. Is there a reason for that, do you know?
There was a security issue with storing them on the appliances.
Right. What was the nature of that security issue?
We didn't have anywhere secure to store them when we were on visits.
Oh, I see. Physical security.
Yes.
I see. And so how were crews on CUs expected to be able to communicate with the bridgehead normally?
In a normal incident, via handheld radio.
Right. And is that also the case with communications with the other CUs?
For the one CU to talk to another
Yes.
CU, yes, handheld radios.
And anybody
Channel
on,
10,
And anybody on the incident ground?
yes,
Same again, Channel 10?
yes.
Yes. Now, you say in the second line of page 11 of your statement, the Commissioner, Danny Cotton, in the end gave us her handheld radio as we needed it desperately, which was very nice of her. Do you remember when that was?
I do not. It was approximately, I would suggest, 4:30.
Why do you suggest that?
Because I remember it was light. She asked her staff officer, Keely Foster, if I've got the name correct, to go and get further radios to assist us.
Right. Did that mean that she was then without a radio?
Yes.
Now, on pages 11 and 13 of your statement, and I'll take this quickly and summarise it if I can, you say that incident command channel that was used was FLONOPS 1 across the fireground. Is that right? Can you confirm that?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah. Do you know when that became the command channel?
I do not know.
Would that be the normal fallback channel to use, or was that an exception?
It was a total exception of an incident, the likes of which I've never seen before, and no one I've ever met has ever seen before. We were adapting as best we could, using every item of equipment we had.
Do you need an airwave radio to access FLONOPS 1?
Yes.
And we've heard evidence before that, in fact, only senior officers, station managers and above, have personal airwave radios. Does that mean that FLONOPS 1 was only accessible by officers of the rank of station manager and above?
At that time, yes.
Right.
To qualify that, the FLONOPS 1 is also accessible on every appliance, but obviously the radios themselves are fixed in the front of the cab and not been able to be mobile.
Yes. Yes. You say at that time. Do you mean at that time during the incident, or at that time generally?
At that time, generally.
Right. I think you also had to borrow Andy Rowe's airwave radio so as to be able to communicate with other CUs.
Possibly.
Is the CU, does the command unit have, or is it supposed to have an airwave radio of its own?
So it has an airwave radio in the front, it has an airwave radio in the rear.
Right.
At the time it had 2 portable handheld radios, but were not on the run at that time.
Right. Do you remember how long you had Andy Rowe's airwave radio for?
I don't. I know that Keely Foster went and got an extra battery. It was a considerable period of time that I had both the Commissioners and the AC's radios.
Do you remember what channel radio communications were taking place between CU8 and the bridgehead?
Again, we used many different forms of communication rather than a specific channel.
Right.
As I spoke earlier, I believe I spoke to Pat Goldborn on a mobile phone,
right,
where he passed the information over to me. But again, we were using every form of communication. So we would have used FLONOPS 1 if, which I believe they did have an airwave radio up there.
Yes, being Pat Goldborn being a senior officer.
Yes, and Richard Welsh, who was up there as well.
Yes, they would have had airwave radios.
Absolutely.
So they would have been able to communicate by airwave FLONOPS 1 with the command units.
Yeah, so it's not
right?
the assumption that the individual would take an airwave radio onto an incident ground with them. They don't have to, because it's a relatively expensive piece of equipment and they could be involved in wet conditions which could make the radio wet. So I can't determine whether one individual had a radio or not. That's something that would have to be followed up with those individuals.
Right, I see, okay. Do you know for a fact whether Group Manager Welch and Group Manager Goldborn actually used airwave radios from the bridgehead to communicate with CU7 or CU8?
I'm confident that they did, yes.
Right, okay. And would that have been on FLONOPS 1?
Yes.
Now, at pages 12 to 13 of your statement, you refer to Pat Delaney setting up a radio path with somebody inside the incident, or someone at the base of the tower. That's at the bottom of page 12 and over to page 13. And you say that was someone halfway between command unit and the command unit itself to pass messages back in a four-way communication channel due to the high usage of radios at the incident. We use channel 10 on our handheld radios, which is a command unit specific channel. And then you go on to describe FLOMOPS 1 as well and FLOMOPS 4. I just want to ask you about the Delaney radio path. Do you remember when, during the incident, that was established?
No, as I say, I later learned, so it wasn't something I was aware of during the incident. It was something that I learned later that Pat Delaney told me concerning what he had set up.
I see. Do you know how it worked?
Yes, so there would be one person in the tower, as it says there, one person passing information on someone at the base of the tower, someone halfway between the tower, and then possibly somewhere closer to the FSG CU, and then ultimately they would pass that message on to the CU.
What was the purpose of setting up this four-way radio communication path?
What you have to appreciate is that Grenfell Tower itself was a Faraday's cage. It was impossible to get communications in and out due to the construction, due to the metal cladding on the outside. Radio, or specifically handheld radio signals, would be bouncing off, wouldn't be able to travel very far. So to overcome this, Pat Delaney set up a route that would be able to overcome it.
I'm so sorry to ask you, you said something that sounded like a Faraday cage.
Yes.
Did you say that?
I did.
What do you mean by that?
Faraday cage is, if I've got the term correct, is a way to stop electronic signals getting into an area that you don't want it to get into. It's a science term.
It sounds as if you know or knew that Grenfell Tower was such a structure. Is that right?
I know it now. I know that it was cladded in metal. I know that there was rebar continually throughout the concrete construction, which is metal, which would have bounced off. And I know that there's a huge amount of metal in the surrounding area, which means that the signals themselves won't be able to necessarily permutate through the structure.
Would that sort of information about that sort of structure be something that would be reflected on the operational risk database or the mobile data terminal?
No.
Do you know whether the Pat Delaney system, what you know of it, improved communications into the tower?
Yes.
It did. Do you know why it wasn't used earlier on in the incident?
Because it was resource intensive. You've got the potential to use Chinese whispers. You have to get the correct persons available. I believe he used CU operatives who are competent and confident on the radio so that they could pass it in. It wasn't until he had the right people with the right skills at the right time being able to deliver the right message.
Do you know which channel? Do you know for yourself which channel he was using?
I don't know, but my belief would be that it would be channel 10 utilising, which is the command channel for CU personnel, which would utilise that channel and the other individuals that were on that channel.
Do you know who else, which other individuals, watch managers, etc., were involved in his four-way path?
I don't know. That's a question you'd have to ask Mr. Delaney.
I see. Okay. Do you know whether any FSG messages were passed to or from the tower via that radio path?
No. It's a closed channel that is specifically for brigade personnel. There is no way that a member of the public would be able to interrupt it.
When I say FSG messages, what I mean is information between members of the brigade about FSG.
No. I don't understand how they could pass that information on to someone in that chain.
Right. Could that chain have been used, for example, in order to communicate FSG information or outcomes about deployments to and from the tower?
There's every possibility that it could be utilised.
Right. Do you know whether it was?
To the best of my knowledge, no.
Right. Do you know why that was?
Again, that's something I'm not aware if there was specific communication issues between the bridgehead and the FSG command unit. That's something that would have to be asked of those individuals.
I'm going to turn to a different topic, which is the change in stay put advice. Now, in your contemporaneous notes, you say, and I'll just ask this to be put on the screen, it's MET quadruple 05344. And if I can just show you page 3. You say, that this is third paragraph down. The FSG advice was still to stay within the flat. I received a call from, I believe, Control, informing me that this advice had now changed. I seem to remember that the officer of the day had given the decision to tell all callers on the line that they should now exit the building. My first question is, how were you contacted? You say I received a call. What was it on?
On a telephone.
On the CU?
Yes.
CU8?
Yes.
You said the telephone. Was that the mobile telephone on the CU, or is it a different one?
There are only mobile telephones on the CU.
There are. Okay.
Yeah.
But it's, when I say mobile on the CU, is it one that's fixed to the CU, or can you move around outside the CU with it?
My belief is it was a fixed handheld mobile phone.
Right. Do you remember who you got the call from? I know you say Control. Do you remember who it was at Control?
No. At the time, I believed it was the officer of the day, but it may have been the officer of the watch. I am 99% confident it was a male, which would lead me to believe that it would be more likely to be the officer of the day.
Right. And do you remember, even if roughly, what time that was?
It was 2:42.
That's not roughly. Why do you say 2:42?
Because I've read the incident log, I've asked Jackie McConaughey. My memory was it was significantly later. So my memory is untrustworthy within timescales due to the traumatic incident and everything. But I remember specifically asking Jackie what time it was, because I believed it to be somewhere in the region of 4:30, but I believe it's 2:42.
Okay, so in fact, I think the answer to my question is you don't remember what time it was, and you've refreshed your memory later by reference to other records.
I remember specifically the conversation I had,
yes.
And I remember that that conversation and that date time stamp is 2:42.
Right. Okay. Our transcript of the decision log taken by Jackie McConaughey actually starts at 2:47, with Andy Rowe taking over, not at 2:42. So I wonder if you're referring to a different document.
No, it is that document. Whatever time is written within there that's recorded by Jackie McConaughey, it's not 2:42 then, I apologise. Whatever time is recorded by her, that is the time that I said. But like I say, I asked her specifically because my memory was that it was significantly later.
Right, okay. All right, well, we won't need to take time up on asking you about that document. The document speaks for itself. Can you remember any details about the conversation that you had with the officer of the day?
No, it was very matter of fact. I didn't need any more information other than that they've changed the policy advice.
Right.
I passed it on to the officer in charge. Again, I interrupted him. It was a matter of urgency. It's possibly one of the most important messages he's received that evening.
Right.
And as such, I passed it on to him. And then I believe it was passed on to the FSGCU. Do
you remember speaking to DAC Fenton in the BCC about the change in advice?
I believe that may have been the person that I spoke to.
Right. Do you remember whether he asked you for permission to change the stay put advice, or do you remember the conversation, or was he just telling you that that's what was happening?
So my recollection prior to you mentioning that is that he told me, but I'm now questioning that, and he may have asked that question. And as such, I can't confidently give you a direct answer, but as detailed in my statement, I believed at the time that he had told us that that's what was happening, rather than asking for permission.
Okay, let's see if we can just push this a little further. Do you remember whether, having had that conversation with who you remember to be DAC Fenton.
Potentially DAC Fenton.
Potentially DAC Fenton. You left it on the basis that you would get back to him, or was it a once and for all conversation?
No, it was a definite article. It was a definite answer. There was no need to get back to him. I've assured him, and I spoke to the officer in charge whilst that information came in to inform him that information had come in.
Was the person in the BCC you were speaking to about change in stay put advice still on the phone when you spoke and when you told
Yes.
AC Rowe what was happening?
Yes.
I see. And what did AC Rowe say? Do you remember?
Okay.
He said okay. And did you relay that back? Do you remember relaying that back to
Yes.
the BCC?
Yes.
I see. So it was essentially a three-way conversation.
It was a very similar
through
conversation to the one I had with Pat Garborn concerning not being able to go past what I believe to be the 11th floor.
Do you know, I mean, it is a fact that it's not recorded on Vision or on our short incident log. Do you know why that might be?
The conversation with DIC Fenton?
Yeah, well, the change in the stay put advice.
Because it wasn't on a recordable device. It wasn't on Flonops 1, it wasn't on the main scheme radio, and it wasn't sent via CSS. So it was sent potentially by a mobile phone that isn't recorded.
Do you know why it wasn't sent out as an informative message?
Yes, because remote people can't send informative messages. The only person who can send informative messages is the officer in charge.
Right. Now, Andy Rowe says in his statement that he's given to the police, which we've seen, and we'll obviously explore this with him, but he says that he asked the CU to contact control and ask them to stop giving stay put advice if they still were. Do you remember that? Is that what you remember?
I don't.
Right. Do you have a comment on that?
There were 3 other people on that command unit that may have sent that message. Maybe discussing the conversation with them, they may have an answer that is that they were the ones that sent that message.
Just leaving aside the question of messages, do you actually remember being asked by Andy Rowe to get hold of control yourself and tell them to stop giving stay put advice?
Are you talking about specifically stay put advice or to change the FSG advice? Because there's a wide difference.
That is a good question, which I'm not able to answer. But let me ask you what you remember of what Andy Rowe said. I'm
sorry, but I can't answer the question if you don't understand the actual terminology. Well, the best person would be
let's
Andy
take
Rowe.
both. He says, I asked CU to contact control and ask them to stop giving stay put advice if they still were. Now, however one interprets that, does that trigger a recollection in your mind as to what Andy Rowe said?
No.
Right.
But again, stay put advice is different to FSG advice. So to change the FSG advice is fine. Maybe AC Rowe was passing information on to inform people that are carrying out stay put advice, which is different to FSG advice.
Yes.
That they need to get out in case maybe the individual hasn't considered it.
Yes. No, I absolutely. But looking at the FSG advice change, do you recall being asked by Andy Rowe to contact control and ask them to change the FSG advice at all?
No, control rang me to say that they are changing the FSG advice.
That's it?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, different topic again. If you go to page 13, it comes back to this question of 11th floor we looked at earlier on. I just want to finish that one off, if I can. On page 13, in the second paragraph from the bottom, you say, in the second line, I remember AC Rowe was sitting on the rear of the command unit when I took a radio call over the handheld radio from Group Manager Goulbourne telling me he was asking crews to do more than is physically possible to get past the 11th floor. Do you remember the approximate time of this?
I don't, but again, you can check Jackie McConaughey's incident log and it will have the specific time.
Right. Do you remember whether you or anybody else on CU8 passed that information on to control?
I have no recollection of contacting control informing them that.
You've no recollection of it. Do you recall talking to CU7 and telling them to speak to control about that? I have no recollection of that now. No. Do you remember receiving any other updates which relate to the inability to reach particular floors or relate to any decisions not to go above certain floors?
From the incident ground?
Yes.
Yes.
Could you
It was
elaborate?
constantly changing the distance of travel that they could achieve, what floor they were going on to. The bridgehead was going up and down due to conditions improving and then worsening and then improving again. Crews were told not to go above certain floors, and then ultimately, due to confusion, due to, as has already been explained within the hearing, the numbering of the floors, people would go higher than would be expected. People would be told to go to a certain floor and wouldn't be able to get to that floor because they were diverted to rescue individuals that were coming down. This was constant information that was coming back.
Do you remember whether any system was put in place or any communications method was set up in order to keep control abreast of what floors couldn't be accessed by crews, so that they could pass that information on to anybody calling from floors above that limit?
I don't remember that conversation at all.
Right. Is there any reason why control...
Well, that would have been after the stay put and the FSG advice would have changed.
Yes.
So control's advice is for them to get out anyway. So us saying that we couldn't get to them, I don't understand
I follow.
why that would be passed on to individuals.
No, I understand. But I think you, in that last answer, you've put the timing of these difficulties about not accessing floors as after the change in the FSG advice. So
I believe so, yes.
Can we be confident about that?
If you give me the exact time that Jackie McConaughey recorded the time, the stay put advice was changed, then I would feel significantly more confident.
Well, I can tell you that her first entry is at 2:47, and that does record. I mean, perhaps we should look at it, because it's obviously something perhaps you should see, given that you've referred to it. If you could please go to MET quadruple 05404 and look at page 1. I just want to make sure there's no confusion about this. We see the first time mark is at 02:47. AC Row takes over and receives handover from DAC O'Loughlin. AC Row records decision to deviate from FSG advice being delivered to FSG callers by control staff and advise people to make efforts to leave the building.
2:47, I was
briefed
5
about
minutes
it.
out, yeah.
So that's what you refer. So,
Yeah.
so are you saying that after that time?
Yes.
It was difficult to reach particular.
Yes, I mean that was relatively early on within the incident, and the conversation with Pat Garbon was significantly later than that.
I see. Okay. No. A different topic again. I wanted to ask you about some plans of the building. At the bottom of page 14 of your statement, you say that there was a tactical coordination group meeting between various organisations, and during that meeting, and I'll quote, AC Row had asked the council to provide plans of the building, including the internal layout. It is vital we have plans, as mentioned when I was talking about 72D visits, that there was no detailed information or comprehensive notes of the building layout from a London Fire Brigade aspect, nothing regarding access, exits, firefighting media. All we had was a recent photograph that was taken. And then you go on to say, a female representing the council said she would get the internal layout plans for us and was working on it. About 45 minutes later, I went onto the incident ground and spoke to the same female asking for an update on these plans. She told me she'd not yet found the plans and was still working on it. At a TCG meeting later that morning, AC Row asked the female for the plans and they still weren't present. AC Row expressed that this will be a big thing, that when asked for one thing, the council couldn't provide it. Well, leave that on one side. Can I just ask you some specific questions about all of that? First of all, what time, do you remember, was that first reference to the plans at the tactical coordination group meeting?
I don't have that time, but that would be recorded within the TCGM notes.
Right. Do you know whether Andy Rowe was the first person to request plans, or had anybody requested them before that?
He was the first person to formally ask for the plans within a TCGM, but questions had been asked by, to best of my knowledge, Norman Harrison and Mark Kenfield concerning plans, and also I was asked to get plans from the MDT.
Right. Do you know what the outcome of Mark Kentfield's and Norman Harrison's request for plans was?
Well, they didn't get them, which is why we specifically asked for them in the TCGM.
Yes. Do you know why they didn't get them?
Because the individual that was supposed to be supplying them just couldn't do the one thing we asked her to do.
Do you know who Mark
do not.
Kenfield and Norman Harrison asked?
No.
No. Just going back a moment then to your last answer but one about the time recorded in the TCGM notes, could you please be shown again, 005404? You can turn to page 5, because we can, I think, pick this up in those notes. If you look at time mark of 0453, on page 5, I think, in the page 5, page 4. If you look at 0453, it's the last entry there. CU staff report building plans should be in firebox in lobby. That's the first entry we've been able to find in that log. Do you know whether there was any reference or any meeting about it any earlier than that time, 0453?
So yeah, I do remember that there was issues concerning the firebox and the firebox not necessarily being fully stocked with what should be there. And I believe that's the information that we were passed on from the council, that don't worry about it, the plans are in the box.
Now, you've referred to a recent photograph that was taken in your statement, which I've just read out to you. Do you know what that photograph was of?
From the MDT?
Well, no, you say in your statement, perhaps look at it, it's page 15, second line. All we had...
Yes, that's from the MDT, so the MDT wasn't fully populated.
Right, do you remember what the photograph was of?
It was of Grenfell Tower prior to the cladding being installed.
What, the exterior?
Yes.
Right.
That's the best of my recollection.
Okay. But you said that was on the MDT, was it?
Yes.
Right. Do you remember whether the plans that you kept asking for were actually ever given to you?
I never saw them.
You never saw them. Okay. Seeing if I can give a time on it. Page 18 of your statement, second line, or second sentence. Sorry, second paragraph, I suppose it is really. It's a single sentence. You say, we still had not received any plans of the building layout from the council by this point. Now, the point you're referring to is, if you look at the previous paragraph, you seeing crew manager Sean Murphy discussing with Andy Rowe about an individual who had fallen on Sean Murphy. So by this point, can you help us about what time that might have been?
Well, I remember specifically going out and speaking to the lady at around 7:30.
Right.
And I remember speaking to her again to try and find out where the plans were. Right. Significantly later would have been potentially 9:30, and the answer was the same.
Right. What was the name of the council officer who was asked to fetch the plans?
I don't know the name, that's why I refer to her as the lady.
Right. Did the fact that you didn't have plans, in your recollection, did that hamper any search and rescue efforts?
The plans themselves would have fed into the operational plan, is a vital part and a vital role, detailing fixed installations and detailing everything within the building. It would detail the pipeline of gas, of water, where electricity were. It was vital that we needed those plans.
Is there any specific way in which not having those plans hampered the brigade's search and rescue efforts at Grenfell?
For search and rescue, The layout of all the flats were the same, but specifically the layout of utilities, the isolation points for all the utilities, that would all be marked on the plans, the fixed installations, the dry riser, the wet riser, the smoke vents, the fire doors, all of that would be detailed on the plans that we were waiting upon.
Right. So in terms of what not having the plans prevented the brigade from doing, does that relates to specific location of specific valves, taps, points like that?
Yes, and I mean, I have not looked at the detailed plans of Grenfell, but I do know that there was extensive building work that went on, and if something had changed, as you go higher, there were different layouts of flats, that's something that would definitely have aided our crews.
Yes. Then refocusing on my question, did the fact that you didn't have plans hamper the search and rescue efforts in any way?
I would say yes.
In what way?
If we can't isolate items, if we can't operate smoke vents, if we can't isolate dry risers where the doors are, that's potentially going to make the incident significantly worse. If the incident's getting significantly worse, that's going to affect our crews. It's going to make the response time significantly greater, and it's going to put them in greater danger, and the individuals inside the property in greater danger.
Turning to a final topic, list of residents. If I can ask you to look at page 19 of your statement. In the second paragraph there, you say, we were desperately trying to find a list of the residents inside the tower. I received a call from somebody saying he had a potential list of residents which the command units could cross-reference and tally who had been rescued. At 13:18 hours, I received an email from station manager Vince Bell, which contained a list of residents. And you go on to explain what happened to that email trail. My question is, first of all, can you recall who you received the call from?
Station manager Vince Bell.
No, sorry, in the first sentence of that paragraph, you say, I received a call from somebody saying he had a potential list of residents. Did you receive the call from Vince Bell?
I believe so.
Right. Can you recall whether a list of residents was actually requested?
Continually.
Right. And who made that request? Was that Vince Bell?
No, that would have been the IC.
I see, okay. Were you aware that Group Manager Goodall had received a list of residents from the council?
I was not.
Ordinarily, would you have expected a list of residents to have been obtained earlier?
Absolutely.
Would you expect a list of residents to be held on site in some way, normally? Or
No.
Would you wouldn't?
No.
Okay. Mr. Johnson, you've been very patient with my questions, and I want to say thank you. I've come to the end of my questions. I think now is an appropriate moment for a break. There may or may not be some further follow-ups.
Can I just say something? I just wanted to say that any negativity that came across yesterday with the brigade was completely blown out of the water by the efforts of my team and everyone I worked with on the evening, from the Commissioner to the AC to everyone else. And I'd like to recognise the admiration and the pride that I have for working for London Fire Brigade and how brilliantly everyone did on that evening, with the sole purpose to save life and provide the best for the people of London.
Yeah, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, Mr. Millett doesn't have any more questions himself. We'll take a short break now. It's possible that other questions will emerge during the break, so I'm going to ask you to be ready to come back if we need to ask you any further questions.
Okay.
If we don't need to come back, I'll say now how grateful we are to you for coming to give us such a wide-ranging amount of evidence, which is going to be very helpful indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll resume at 12:25, and better if you don't talk about your evidence to anyone for the time being. Would you like to go with the usher, and then we'll have a break? Yeah. Right, 12:25. Well, Mr. Willis, I gather you may have some more questions.
From a surprising array of sources. Very short questions.
Yes, all right. Yes, well, we better get Mr. Johnson back in. And now, Mr. Johnson, I'm sorry to have to ask you to come back, but there are a few more questions for you now. You're going to have difficulty because they've rearranged the furniture for the next witness.
It was
So
explained, it's right.
do you mind standing just for what I hope will be a short
That's fine.
The gratitude we've expressed previously continues to apply. I have very short questions for you. First of all, you told us quite a lot about the CSS on the CU.
Yes.
Can I ask you, can one normally use the CSS to access the vision log?
Only for that specific incident.
So, for that specific incident, is it possible, therefore, to get on the CU to the vision log and see what informative and other messages have been passing from, say, control to the incident ground?
You can, but you can also do that using the internet interface via our hotwire and log on to BOSS Vision to enable you to access it. So there's two different places that you can access it.
Right. Would you need, for the latter of those, would you need access to the internet?
Yes.
Was there access to the internet from CU 7 or 8 on the night?
Yes, I accessed email, which is only available via the internet, and intranet, which is our inbuilt internet service.
Right. And do you know whether, so far as you know, to the best of your recollection, on CU8, the CSS was used or usable to access the vision log?
No, it wasn't. The CSS wasn't working at all. But the computer itself would have been able to use Vision.
So can I summarise it this way, that as far as you know, the CSS, if it had been working, would have been able to get on to access the vision log, but it wasn't working, so you couldn't?
Yes.
Right. My second question relates to the firebox. Did you know whether there was a firebox at Grenfell?
I was just informed that there was a firebox and that the plans were in there. That's all. I did not see a firebox, or LFB box as it's sometimes called, and that wasn't my role, and I was so remote from the incident.
Right.
Other than going in a couple of times, it wasn't something that I witnessed.
Do you know who told you that there was a firebox and the plans were in there?
I believe, to the best of my knowledge, it was Mark Kenfield.
Mark Kenfield. If Mark Kenfield had told you that the firebox was there and had plans in it, can you explain why it was necessary to keep pursuing the plans with the council until...
To the best of my knowledge, there were no plans in there.
Right. Thank you very much.
That's it.
That's it. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Johnson, I'm glad to say there are not too many extra questions. Once again, thank you very much for coming to give us your evidence. It will be very helpful.
Thank you.
And now you are free to go.
Thank you.
Thank you. So would you like to go with the usher? Now, I see we've already rearranged the furniture.
We have, Mr. Chairman. I'm very happy to take the next witness immediately.
Yes.
Or I'm happy to take an early lunch now and come back at 1:30.
I think we'd be better to start, wouldn't we?
Very good. Certainly.
you.
Take the book and your raise hand and repeat the words for me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the
and nothing but the
truth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Loft. I gather you're happy standing to give your evidence.
I am indeed, sir, yes.
So I hope everything's ready for you. All right. Yes, Mr. Willett.
Mr. Loft, first of all, can I ask you please to give your full name to the chairman?
Yeah, it's Brett Ashley Loft.
Brett Ashley Loft, thank you. Can I start by saying thank you very much to you for coming to us and assisting us with our investigations in this inquiry. We really do very much appreciate it. My questions are intended to be short and simple, But if you have any difficulty in understanding them or want me to rephrase them in any way, I'm very happy to do so. But if you want to break at any time, you need only indicate.
Okay.
Can I please ask you, first of all, to take your statement, which should be in either in the blue folder in front of you, or, as we normally look at it, on the left, on your right, on my left, on your screen in front of you.
Yep.
It's dated the 31st of October 2017, and it is MET quadruple 7518. So we've read that into the record. Have you read it recently?
I have, yes.
And can you confirm that its contents are true?
They are, yes.
Now, we also have your contemporaneous note, which is referenced MET quadruple 5294. Have you read that recently?
I have, yes.
And can you confirm that the contents of that are true as well?
They are, yes.
Yes. And that there are also 13 photographs that you took on the night, which are exhibits BLO 2 to 13. And if you don't mind, I'll just read the numbers into the record. That's MET 000 15644, 15633, 15607, 15628, 15601, 15635, 15643, 15605, 15638, 15614, and 15647 and 15604. Have you discussed your statement or the evidence that you're going to give to us today with anybody else before coming here today?
No, I haven't.
Thank you. Can I start then with your role and your training? As at the date of your statement, I think you'd been in the LFB for 23 years or so.
That's correct, yes.
And you are currently a station manager,
I am.
and you're based at Chelsea.
I am, yes.
And in June 2017, I think you were a station manager, is this right, based at Stanmore?
Yeah, I was based at Stanmore. I moved to Chelsea in the August.
In August 2017?
Yes, that's right.
Have you ever received or delivered training on fighting high-rise fires?
Yes, I have. Many times over the last 20-odd years, we've had training at stations. As a station manager, a couple of years ago, we did what we call back to basics training, which I believe has been mentioned before,
Yes.
where I obviously helped facilitate it as a station manager.
More specifically, did you ever receive or deliver training on high-rise fires that covered the subject of ignition of the facade?
No, I didn't.
Are you aware of a fire at Shepherd Court in August 2016?
I'm aware of it because, again, the news, it was on the news, but that's as far as my...
Did you ever give or receive any training on the lessons learned from Shepherd Court?
No, I didn't.
Did you ever give or receive training in strategies for full or partial evacuation of high-rise residential buildings?
No, I didn't.
Did you ever receive or give any training about the circumstances in which you would consider implementing any kind of evacuation of a building which had a stay-put policy in place?
No, not at all.
Can I then turn to mobilisation and arrival at Grenfell on the night of the fire? In your statement on page 2, you say, in the first line, that you were on a night shift on that night and was using the camping out facility at Fulham Fire Station. And you were awake because you were monitoring another incident in Oxford Street. And you received a pager message mobilising you to the incident. And we have a time for that of 01:15:28. Now, we have that in our short incident log. I don't need to go to it, but does that ring a bell with you?
Yeah, that's right.
That sounds right, does it?
It does, yes.
Now, you then, you say you called control, and we've got a summary of that conversation in the new operational response report for the second hour. Can I show you that, please?
Yep.
And I'd ask you to go to page 28 in that document. Or 29 in the electronic version, Mr. Documents Director. It's LFB quadruple 04828. And if you go to page 29 electronically, 28 internally, of that document, the time mark it's the page before. That's it. It's 01:17:21, and this is the summary I want to ask you about. It says SM Loft calls brigade control and says he's been paged to a 6-pump fire. CRO Peter Duddy confirms he is the first SM. He then informs SM Loft that Golf 271 with watch manager Dowden, Golf 272 and Golf 331 are all in attendance. Golf 361, 362 and Alpha 212 are on the way. He then says that the second SM is Walton and the group manager GM is Patrick Goulbourne. He continues to say we have SM Daniel Egan assigned as FSO and SM Cook as PLO. SM Loft asks that if it's gone straight to 6 pumps. CRO Duddy says it's a standard fire, 3 pumps first, then sends a message back to 6 pumps and 1 HP for high rise. SM Loft asks how many calls have been received. CRO Duddy tells them we have 4 calls altogether. SM Loft asks to be shown the status as status 2. Now, I've read it all out to you. It's rather a lot of information there, but is there any part of that which you think might be wrong?
So according to that, I was told I was the first SM. As far as I was aware, I was the second because actually at the time, no, I wasn't aware I was the second, but I did know that I just heard Andy Walton go out before I made that call.
Yes.
And then when I was told he was on that incident, I then assumed I was the second SM, even though I've been told I was the first.
Yes. So, do you think that your reference in your statement that you were the second SM might be a mistake?
That will be from knowing that Andy Walton was called before me, so I knew I was the second
Right.
at the time. But obviously control at the time, when they were making the mobilisations, they had me down as the first.
Right. Do you remember control informing you that you were in fact the first SM?
I can't remember that detail.
Okay. To be clear on what the first SM means, was it your understanding when you spoke to control as recorded here that you would be taking over from watch manager Dowden on arrival as the most senior person present?
If I'd been the first station manager to arrive, then that's normal procedure would be the first senior officer to arrive would take over. Being called as the first SM on a pager, you may not necessarily get there first because there may be another station manager that beats you to it, basically,
Right.
gets there before you.
Okay. And on the way to the incident, did you think that you were going to be taking over incident command?
I didn't, for the simple reason I knew that Station Manager Walton had already left Fulham before I made the call, so he had a good 3-4 minute head start on me.
I see. Did you speak to Andy Walton before you left for the incident?
Before I left the incident?
Or you left for the incident?
Oh, no, I didn't know. He'd already left before I...
He'd already gone. I see.
Yep.
Okay. Now, we have a record that you asked Control to book you in as status 2, and we have a time for that of 019:15, and that's the short incident log at page 13. I don't need to go to it, but again, does that accord with your recollection? Status 2, mobile to incident at 01:19:25.
Yeah, that would do, because I've been paged at 1:17 and then a couple of minutes phone call with Control.
Right.
End of that conversation would have been status 2.
Now, we also have an arrival time, status 3 for you, of 01:32:08. That's also page 13 of the short incident log. Again, does that accord with your recollection?
That does, yes.
Okay. Now, in your statement, you say that the CU from Fulham was behind you en route. This is about 2/3 of the way down the page. It's not very easy to navigate because there are no paragraph breaks, or only one. But if you go to just below halfway down the page, you say, after the reference to the time being 1:30, the command unit from Fulham was behind me and had not yet been set up. The command unit from Fulham is CU8. Do you have any recollection as to who was running that command unit?
Not at the time, no. I've since become aware who it was that was actually in charge of it, which is what I spoke to later on.
Yes, well, we'll come back to that. You then say, 7 lines up from the bottom of the page, there was very little smoke, but there was smoke coming from the top of the building. Initially, I thought that it was the netting, or it was netting on scaffolding that had caught fire. This happens a lot, and I've seen this many times in my career, but usually this type of fire goes out very quickly. However, I knew the amount of fire appliances had increased steadily, so I could tell that this was probably not the case, and that this wasn't a run-of-the-mill fire. Was that a thought you had at the time, that this probably wasn't a fire involving netting or scaffolding?
Yes, it was. That was my initial thoughts when I first, because I didn't see the incident until I was literally parking up in Beaumont Road.
Right.
Because of the other high buildings around. So my first initial thought when I saw it was that it was netting on the sides. But then I quickly dismissed that because he wouldn't have made pumps 25 by that point,
No.
if that had been the case.
Yes.
I realised it fairly quickly. Yeah, it was a fleeting thought, really.
Right. But when you did dismiss it,
Yep.
what did you think it then was?
Well, we had a serious fire. He'd made pumps 25 just before I booked in, so I knew it was going to be very resource intensive. He needed a lot of firefighters there to assist with it. I knew that originally it was a fire in a flat on the 4th floor, because that's what my pager message had told me. So I knew we had more than just that, so it was definitely something more substantial.
But if it wasn't netting, what did you then think it was that had ignited and was on fire?
From looking at the building straight off, you could see the fire going from the 4th floor. There was fire spread all the way up the outside of the building up to about the 12th up the middle, and then it sort of jumped across to the left-hand side as I'm looking at the east face, which was then almost to the roof on that side.
Yes.
So, as far as I could tell, it looked like it was something on the outside of the building that was alight.
Right. Did you give any thought to the possibility that the cladding, the exterior rain screen on the building was on fire?
I can't remember having that actual thought, but I'm sure that crossed my mind at some point, because what else could there be on the outside that's burning?
Right. Did you have experience of cladding fires, rain screens igniting?
Nothing like that, no.
You've never seen something like that before?
No, not at all.
Now, at the bottom of page 2 of your statement, you say, I could see that this was more than a flat fire, as it seemed to be in multiple premises. Where were you standing when you observed that the fire seemed to be in multiple premises?
Initially, where I parked up in Beaumont, which was right by the CU8. I walked down Grenfell Road, and you had quite a good view of the building from there. And you could see the east face was quite well alight. Whether I had that thought at that point, or it may have been a bit later on when I realised it was inside the building and not just the outside, I'm not sure. So it could have been that initial thought, or it could have been a little bit later on after I'd spoken to Mike.
When you say a little bit later on, how much later on?
5-10 minutes.
Right.
So it was fairly early on. It was obvious it was within the building.
And what did you see yourself to lead you to think or know that there were fires within flats, as opposed simply to being on the outside?
Well, where I said before, where you could see the cladding on the outside, the light going up, you could see basically there was fire within some of the flats next to where the cladding was alight. So you could actually see it was burning inside the building.
Right. So is this right that you knew, therefore? Well, let me ask you this: at the moment you arrived at the base of the tower, did you know by then that the fire had penetrated into individual compartments?
Again, I don't have an actual recollection of thinking that at the time, but it was obvious to me fairly quickly. Whether it was at that point or a little bit later, I'm not sure.
Now, you say on page 3 of your statement at the top that you didn't give your roll board in because the system hadn't been set up, and then you say, I went straight to watch manager Mike Dowden from North Kensington Fire Station. How soon was that after you had booked in status 3 at 1:32?
Well, I'd have booked in on my airwave radio, then I'd have got my PPE on, my fire gear, etc. And then I would have looked to see where I could see the incident commander was, and then it had been a walk down Grenfell Road to where Mike was standing, so no more than 5 minutes, probably not even that long.
Right. Did you know that Mike Dowden was incident commander?
Yes, I did.
Who told you?
I was told by control when I originally got the pager message, and as far as I was aware, it hadn't changed, and Mike was also wearing the incident commander tab after that point.
So that's the call we saw earlier on the incident, on the ORR at
That's
1:17
right, yes.
with Pete Duddy.
Yes.
Yes. And you say, in the next sentence, that Mike Dowden informed me that there had been a fire on the 4th floor and they had put the fire out. However, he had seen the fire travelling up the outside of the building and was asking for extra resources. He was unsure if there were fires in other flats. His initial thoughts were that we would get to the roof and put water into the tower from the top. Did he... Are you quoting here from what he told you, to the best of your recollection?
I am, yes.
Right. So when he said to you, I'm not sure if there were other fires, or there are fires in other flats, did you say anything to him in response?
Well, again, that might help with my recollection of when I saw fires or realised there was fires within the flats, because I may not have seen it at that point.
Right.
But then after I'd spoken to him, and then we'd noticed it after that. So that would make more sense.
So you don't recall correcting him and saying, no, there are fires in flats?
I don't remember correcting him.
Right. Now, also on page 3, we've just seen it, he says, or you say his initial thoughts were to get to the roof and put water into the tower from the top. Just on that, did you yourself have any thoughts about this proposed course of action?
Not at that time, no. Only having just arrived, I was still trying to get a bit of awareness of what was going on.
Right.
So I was listening to what Mike had to tell me, and that was one of his suggestions.
Did you have any discussion with Mike Dowden about that proposal?
Not at that time, no. In fact, not any time, actually.
Did you have any thoughts yourself about how that proposal might be achieved in practice?
I could see the reasoning behind it, but seeing how the fire had quickly spread up the front, how practical that would have been, without having more information about conditions inside, I wouldn't have been able to basically implement that at that time.
Is that practical proposal something that you had ever experienced being deployed before?
Not at all, no.
So this was a novelty, was it?
Yeah, it was a using the equipment we've got. Obviously, with line rescue, that doesn't get involved in fires at all. But being such an incident as it was, never been seen before, it was an idea that could have worked depending on what the situation was like inside the tower.
How could it have worked? Do you know?
The problem with the cladding is it's designed to keep the rain out and water out. So by putting water against it, all it's going to do is throw the water straight off it again. So you're not actually going to get to the fire itself. But by getting to the top, or at least to any of the breaks within the cladding, you'd be able to put water down the inside of the cladding, which would have been able to put out the insulation that was actually burning and not the metal on the outside.
Right. How much did you yourself know about this precise, or even in general terms, the construction and design and materials which constituted the cladding that you could see on fire in front of you?
At that point, I didn't. As the incident went on, you could see that we had loads of metal sheeting coming off the tower that was dropping to the ground, and you could see the insulation that was burning underneath it. So not at that time I knew about the insulation inside, but it became apparent as the incident went on.
Right. Did there ever come a time when you thought that Mike Dowden's plan about getting to the roof and putting water on the roof, well, from the roof down, was feasible? Or?
No, it wasn't. No, it was a nice idea at the beginning, but with the spread of the fire and how quick it was just never going to happen.
In your contemporaneous notes, if I can just ask you to look at those. You say, and it's right at the foot of the page, you say, in my 23 years as a firefighter, I've never witnessed fire spread like this. The speed at which it spread meant we were always chasing it and never had a chance to extinguish it. It's page... I'm sorry, I gave the reference. It's page 2. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of the screen. It's at the bottom of page 2. I'll repeat it again just for the record. In my 23 years as a firefighter, I've never witnessed fire spread like this. The speed at which it spread meant we were always chasing it and never had a chance to extinguish it. That thought that you recorded in your contemporaneous note, was that something that you appreciated on arrival, or is that just a summary of your thoughts throughout the day?
That's a summary of my thoughts at the end of it. At the time, ironically, I don't think it was happening so quick. I didn't have time to have that thought. Does that make sense?
No.
Yeah, it was definitely, when I was writing my notes up at the end of it, it's like, yeah, I've never seen anything like that before.
Did you have any discussion with Mike Dowden about whether you should be focusing on firefighting or whether you should be focusing on search and rescue?
At the time when Mike was talking to me, he had everything in place for high-rise procedure. He had, I know he had jets in there, he had BA crews in there. He told me they had a couple of FSG calls at that point. So I knew that both was happening at that time. We were firefighting and we were also doing rescues, or at least if it wasn't actually a rescue, it was going to the places where the FSGs were being made from.
Right. You say he told you he had a couple of FSG calls at that point.
Yeah, I believe so.
To the best of your recollection, the word couple, is that your impression, or did he use those words? Do you know?
I can't remember, to be precise. I know it wasn't anywhere near how many then started to come through a little bit after that.
En route to the incident, did you pick up over the main scheme radio any impression of the volume and intensity of FSGs beginning to come in?
Not at all, no. The only radio messages I remember was the make-ups. I don't remember hearing any other messages at the time. Right.
Do you know how, by what means of communication, Mike Dowden had come to know about those FSG calls?
No, I hadn't.
Do you know what he was doing about them?
As far as I know, he'd passed that information to the bridgehead and they were actioning them from there.
Right. Do you know how he passed that information to the bridgehead?
I don't know.
You don't? We'll come back to this in a moment. Just on these discussions, did you have a discussion with him, as I say, about firefighting or evacuation, or which should be prioritised?
No, not at that time.
Right. Now, in your statement on page 3, you go on to say, just after the reference to the roof that we've just looked at, still in the first paragraph on that page, you say, we had a general discussion as to our next course of action, and it was decided that Watch Manager Dowden would continue with his role, and that as we had started to receive fire survival guidance calls, I would start running this. Now let's just break that down if we can. First of all, did you and Mike Dowden discuss his overall tactics?
He told me what we had in place at the time. He told me the reasons why he'd made it up to 25 was because he knew we need a lot of BA because of the scale and the speed of the fire. He also knew we had some fire survival guidance calls, and they weren't on the floors where the fire was. It was further up the tower, so we knew we had quite a lot of smoke travel at least at that point, and obviously we could see on the front the actual fire spread. So the actual next course of action was, at that point, was really to carry on with what they were doing, which was getting crews in there up to where the FSGs were and making a decision there whether they need to take them out or not. The actual when I say started to receive fire survival guidance calls, that was when Watch Manager Kentfield from Command Unit came over to me with a big list, or an A4 list of calls they'd had through. And it was sort of that point that we knew we had a serious number of FSGs. And right. It felt appropriate for me to take that and let Mike carry on doing what he was doing. The main reason being that I knew there was another station manager not far away that would then be able to assist Mike with the incident and take over that while I concentrated on the FSGs.
Okay. I'm going to break that answer down a little bit. I'm going to come back to Watch Manager Kentfield's document in a moment. Before I do, you said in that answer that the task was to carry on what they were doing, getting crews in there up to where FSGs were and making the decision whether to take them out or not. Just focusing on that,
yeah.
Was the plan then that you might possibly go to a flat where an FSG was coming from, but nonetheless leave the occupants in there? Was that part of the strategy?
It does have instances. It has happened before. You'll get someone phoning up, believing they're trapped by fire. quite often what will happen is it will be smoke travel within the building. In the meantime, the crews will put the fire out, and you then go there to reassure the residents that the fire's out, the smoke will clear, you're going to be fine where you are, and you leave them there. Obviously, at this situation, that wasn't the case, and the fire, as we know, spread quite rapidly.
Right. So, although that was the plan, are you saying that in fact, once crews got into the buildings, they did not carry out the plan of leaving people where they were?
As far as I know, yeah.
Right. Did you support what Mike Dowden was telling you about his overall plan?
Yeah, so it was the plan that was in place at the time was working as best it could. The issue we had with the plan was we didn't have enough resources at the time, but
Right.
because of the make-up in such quick succession and the speed of the fire, as I sort of said at the end of my statement, that we were chasing it because it was travelling so quickly, we just needed to get the resources there as quick as we could.
And the resources coming there as quick as they could,
Yep.
just to come back to the question I was on a moment ago, was the priority to use the resources for search and rescue, or was the priority to use the resources to fight the fire?
I would have said it would have been a bit of both, because the quicker you can put the fire out, the less people have to rescue.
Right. Did you notice when you first went to Mike Dowden and started having this discussion with him whether occupants of the tower were self-evacuating?
I didn't have that conversation. I do remember some residents coming out of the building, but didn't pay that much attention to them at all, really.
Did you observe whether they were suffering from the effects of
No,
smoke?
that's it. I knew there were people coming out, but I don't remember seeing what sort of condition they were in.
Right. You said you saw some residents coming out. Was it a stream or were they coming out?
No, at that point it was only one or two. There wasn't many when I first arrived.
Did that tell you anything about the nature of the conditions inside the building?
Not from seeing them come out, no.
Did you discuss the stay put advice with Mike Dowden at that moment when you
No.
first went to him?
Not at all. No.
Did you discuss the possibility of full or partial evacuation?
No.
Did you consider declaring a major incident as the most senior officer present?
No, I didn't have that thought, no.
Presumably you didn't have a discussion with Mike Dowden about that
No.
either. Is it correct that the normal procedure would be that you, as the senior officer present, so far as you were concerned, would take over as IC?
Absolutely, yes, yes.
And whose decision was it for you? Whose decision was it for you to take over FSGs and leave Mike running the incident?
It was, well, my initial thoughts when I was heading towards Mike was I was going to take over, knowing I was the first SM.
Yeah.
Having a conversation with Mike on what was in place, that was still primarily going to be what I was going to do. But then when we got the large list of FSG calls come through, Mike and I, it was a joint agreement really that he was happy to carry on doing what he was doing. I'd carry on with the FSGs because we knew we had lots of resources on the way and there would be other people to assist within minutes.
Right. And so I think what you're saying is that it was seeing the list and the volume which meant that FSG calls were actually more important than incident
Absolutely,
command.
yeah.
I see.
Life is always a priority.
Yes, I follow. Did you feel confident that it was appropriate for Mike Dowden to retain control of the incident?
At that point, yes. Because there was only Mike and myself, what felt like only me and Mike outside the building, I was confident that he would be able to carry on doing what he was doing until another station manager arrived.
And were you aware that Station Manager Walton was either shortly behind you or had?
I knew he was. He had to be not far away, so because he left, he camped out at Fulham with me as well.
Yes.
And I heard him leave before I did, so I knew he couldn't be far away.
Were you in touch with him?
I wasn't. No.
Is there a reason for that?
Time. I didn't have a chance to give him a ring and find out where he was.
Did you tell Mike Dowden that Station Manager Walton was also en route?
I did say to him I knew there was another station manager within minutes of me, so he should be here any moment.
And did you have any thoughts about what role Station Manager Walton might take up when he arrived?
My initial thoughts was he would then take over in charge of the incident because I was dealing with the FSG. and then we go from there. Really.
I see. That was your thought.
Yeah.
But what happened to that thought? What actually happened when he arrived? Do you remember?
He, as far as I know, yeah, he did. I spoke to him briefly when he
Face to
saw
face?
me. Yeah, face to face. He came up to me, and I said to him that Mike was still in charge. Can you go and talk to Mike? Which is what he did.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, it's 1 o'clock. Is that a convenient moment?
Yes, I think it is. We're going to have a break now, Mr. Loft, so you and others can, excuse me, get some lunch.
No problem.
I have to ask you not to talk about your evidence or anything relating to it while you're out of the room, and we'll resume at 2 o'clock, please.
Okay, no problem.
All right?
Thank
Thank you very much. I'd like to go to the usher. 2 o'clock, please. Thank you.